coming along to help us with our deliberations this afternoon. It is a warm day. If anybody feels the need to take off a jacket and be more comfortable, please go ahead and do that. I'd just like to introduce the officers who are here today to help us through the meeting. On my right here is Oliver Bolter, who's a strategic manager for planning and infrastructure delivery. Then, where do I have Sarah? Where is she? Not actually. Oh, Sarah's not actually in the room, but hopefully she'll arrive soon as the planning team leader. Stuart Van Quillenberg is our principal planning officer. We have Alan Ransom here from Island Roads as our highways representative. Ben Gard here is our legal advisor, and Jodie Gibson, trainee legal advisor at the far left there. And Marie Bartlett, at the front there, is our cabinet member, is our committee clerk. I'd also like to introduce Councillor Paul Fuller, who is the cabinet member for planning and enforcement. Now, hello, this is Sarah coming in now. Right. There are no planned fire drills during this meeting. If you hear the fire alarm sound, please treat it as a real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route. The nearest escape route is via the signposted set of stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber or public gallery. Exit via the door at the back of the building, walk across the inner car park and around the building to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. The lifts cannot be used in the event of an emergency. Please do not re-enter the building until you are advised it's safe to do so by a council member of staff. Can I ask everyone to please switch off or mute their mobile phones for the duration of the meeting? I'll try and remember to remind you to put them back on again. I have that problem sometimes. I don't put it back on again afterwards. I also like all people who are speaking to use the microphones. This is so that everyone who is watching on the TV transmission, if you like, will be able to hear you, and also for the record of the meeting as well. Please don't eat food during the meeting unless you have a particular medical need to do so. Please do not leave the chamber during the presentation or debate on an application, as that will invalidate your vote. That's for members of the committee. Members of the public, both watching at home and in the gallery, are here present purely to observe the process, not to participate in the meeting. Now, there's a right lighting system, which hopefully somebody's going to help me show off how it works. So when people begin to speak, there's a green light which displays. Can you see that one? And then when you're down to the last 30 seconds of your time limit, it turns into this amber light, as you can see. Oh dear, that's the end one. That's the red light displays, and the sound will stop you. At that point, I'll stop you talking. This is to ensure that all parties receive the same amount of time and that the process is seen to be fair. Right, so we'll move to the agenda. Don't deal with present and apologies here, no? Is that already taken? Yeah. I ask for any apologies of anyone any members of the committee who are unable to be here. Councillor David Adams. Councillor Oliver.
Councillor Price is on a school visit and will get here as soon as he possibly can.
Councillor Matthew Price is going to be late. Take it. Okay, thank you for that. Can I have a proposal on the minutes of the last planning meeting, please? Okay, we'll take that first, Councillor Churchman.
Yes, on page 5, it talks about the reservoir had been emptied. Southern Water said they didn't seem to know where the water was going, etc. And it then says, but it now contained water again. Question mark, please.
I don't think that's a query on the accuracy of the minutes, though, is it, Councillor Churchman? That's about whether.
Well, I think it's more a question. I wish to raise it because it's going against what we were told on site and at the meeting. Thank you.
Right, well, I was not here for this meeting, so I'll have to take advice on this. I'll ask Mr. Guards to comment on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. I'm asked to draw your attention here to the top of page 5, which quantifies the reasons that was raised in that manner. So it does say that water's there. It goes on to say it was noted that the reservoir had been emptied of both fish and water, but it's now contained water again, mainly due to it still connecting to the highway drainage. So that is an accurate reflection of what was said at the meeting.
Councillor Quirk.
Move acceptance.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
Second that proposition.
Do I have any other comments, or should we move to the vote? All those in favour of accepting the minutes as a true record? Thank you very much. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest by members of the committee? Councillor Drew.
Thank you, Chair. I was absent at the site visits, but I have apprised myself of the location to my satisfaction, so I feel that I'm able to vote.
Thank you. And Councillor Spink.
I'm a member of the Countryside charity, the CPRE. They've put in an objection to what I'll describe as the Puck Pool development. I'm simply one of I don't know how many 100 members, but of many members, I've not discussed it with anyone from the CPRE, and I don't consider myself in any way biased or predetermined as a result of simply being a member, but I thought I should declare it.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. Is there anybody else? In that case, I'd like to go to paper B. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I'd like to go to public question times. We have 15 minutes for public questions, and these are questions that are restricted to matters not on the agenda. So any questions from the public, please? I take it that's a no. In that case, we'll move on to paper B, which is planning report. I'll hand over to you now. Okay. This is a presentation on the application by. So the items will be debated in accordance with the order as circulated on the running order sheet. Okay, this is the application reference 20/01733/out, land north of Woodland Close and adjacent Cedar Lodge and Thornton Lodge, Huckball Hill, Seaview, Isle of Wight. So I'd like to invite Stuart Fulenberg to make a presentation on the report.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, councillors. The application relates to what I'll term Puppool Field. It's an area of land about 3 hectares in size, located to the south of Puppool Hill here. It's about 80 metres from Puppool Hills Junction with Apley Road, known as Thornton Cross. Cowthorpe Road runs to the south and southeast. To the north, we obviously have the sea, the Harcourt Sands site. We have Puppool Park over here, Apley Park to the northwest, and again we come through Apley Road to Marlborough Road Junction and the A3055, which heads south towards Tesco, or East Hill Road, which heads back towards the seafront and Ryde. A bit more zoomed in for members, just to understand the parameters of the site. Again, the site's outlined in red. To the north, we have the Harcourt Sands site and a pocket of residential development called Puppool Close, as well as existing properties off Puppool Hill itself. To the northeast, we have the listed building Puppool House, and again, other listed buildings in the vicinity are also starred, which is Thornton Cross, Thornton Cottage to the west, and we have Woodlands Vale and Woodlands Vale Estate to the south and southeast. And again, we have pockets of residential development, Woodlands Close to the south, and Thornton Close here. And there's an existing stables as well to the south called Linfield Stables. To remind members from the site visit, I've put some images up just showing the site at various vantage points. These were taken on the site. The first image is taken towards properties off Puppool Close, to the north. The second photograph down here is looking towards Thornton Cottage, the listed building to the west. This photograph is looking towards the properties to the south of the Woodland Close. This image is taken looking towards the southeast corner and south boundary of the site, and I've put a little note here where you can just about make out the turret of the Woodlands Vale listed house, which is referred to in the report. That's pretty much the only vantage point where you'll see it from the site. And I say the last photo over here is looking towards the southern boundary with Cedar Lodge. These photos are taken looking outside of the site. The first photo is taken looking from Puppool Close towards the roadside frontage boundary. Second photograph is taken from the seafront, and that's looking towards Woodlands Vale. And you can see how open the parkland is from this perspective. And also the site is roughly behind these trees here. This photo is taken from Apley Road. You'll just see the archery field here. And again, Thornton Cottage is here, and the site is in this area here. This photo is taken from Thornton Cowthorpe Road here, and a junction with Thornton Manor Drive. And say Thornton Cottage you'll just make about here, and that's Boundary Hedgerow, which is screening from this vantage point. And this photo here is taken from Cowthorpe Road further to the south, I say looking towards the junction with Woodlands Close. The stables is over here, and the properties off Woodlands Close are here. To remind members of the indicative layout's been put forward, so the proposal is for up to 50 houses. All matters are reserved apart from access. The proposal would be to put a new access in here through the north roadside boundary, opposite property known as Queen's View, just off of Puppool Close. And say the proposal then is indicative at this moment stage in terms of layout, but it is indicating effectively a spine road, residential properties fronting the roads, on-site access roads. There would be about just over a hectare of public open space, particularly over in this corner where the existing pond is, and that's looked to be enhanced with new species, meadow-rich grassland planting. And so there's new tree planting indicated through the site on both sides to create a kind of tree-lined avenue effect. But I say all of this is really indicative. Members will note that there's an indication providing an attenuation pond feature in the south and eastern corner, saying that's as part of the drainage scheme to take any surface water runoff and attenuate that into the public sewer. In terms of the proposed access arrangements through the north boundary, it would effectively be a 5.5 metre wide carriageway into the site, The junction here is about 15 metres wide, and I've highlighted that in yellow. Members will note I've highlighted 15-metre width approximately on this photograph, so you get an idea of roughly where that is along the roadside boundary. There would be 2-metre wide pavements through the site. Members would note that off-site it is proposed to put in a widened footpath up to 1.8 metres, and that would link through from the Harcourt Sands junction here through to the Putpool Close junction here, which would have a slightly tighter radii at its junction, and that would tie in with the new footway alignment. It is also proposed to widen the carriageway to the south to 5.5 metres to allow for that, and that would require moving the actual roadside boundary back about 1.5 to 2 metres. And again, members will note that the roadside boundary would be required as part of that setback to remove all hedgerow and trees from about the centre of Putpool Close through to T12 here, just before the Harcourt Sands junction. I have got an image of that to give you an idea, just to show you the sort of sections we're talking about. So this is roughly the centre of Putpool Close. So all of this would need to be removed. Again, this is looking further down towards the Harcourt Sands entrance. Again, this section down to T12 here, which we saw on site. And I say these widening works are reflective of the scheme to widen the carriageway to support the Harcourt Sands redevelopment across the way. Although there would be a further setback on the site here, just to provide the visibility space for the new access. And members will note that the proposal is to replant new tree and hedgerow planting behind the actual vision displays. In terms of to give members an idea, as I said on site, in terms of what would be lost vegetation-wise, the red markers are the areas where there would be, on notes on the tree reports, from tree removals, mainly the roadside boundary hedge. There's some C-grade trees within the site and U-grade trees along this boundary. There's also a single B-grade tree that may have to be removed for the attenuation pond, but again, at this stage, it's indicative and potentially that could be adjusted at a later date. In terms of the other off-site highway improvements, Highways Ireland Roads have recommended that this hedgerow here is cut back, which would enable a 1.8 metre width improvement to this section of the footway, and that would run from Putpool Close, and that would improve the width of the footway running through Thornton Cross. That section we saw on site, this is the hedgerow, which would need to be cut back. It's about 1.2 metres wide at the moment, so it would be about half a metre widening to achieve that. And then that carries on onto the metalled footway to Thornton Cross. Again, that's just looking up towards Apley Road. It's also part of the proposals to provide a financial contribution of about almost £24,000, which the council could then utilise to upgrade this gravel section that's on council land that runs from roughly Putpool Close through to Apley Park. Again, it runs between the archery field and the properties off of Putpool Close. And in terms of the off-site improvements on Apley Road, the proposal would see a new bus shelter put on the north side of Apley Road. There would be a re-provided or repositioned bus shelter the opposite side, which we currently saw on site. There's an issue here that currently people waiting have to wait in the live carriageway. So the proposal would be to realign the markings on Apley Road, and that would allow for a footway to come in front of the bus shelter. Bus shelters shifted slightly to facilitate that, and that would provide a waiting space, a safe space for people waiting at this bus stop. It's also proposed to provide crossing points to provide a sort of uncontrolled link crossing points between two bus stops on two sides of the road. And there would be a 1.5 metre metalled footway that would link from the current metalled footway here, and then it would go eastwards towards Apley Manor, where there currently is a metalled footway here. And this currently is all gravel, so that would be an enhancement on the highway there for pedestrians. And so just to give members, this is the sort of grass verge with the bush. So yeah, so I'll repeat that. So these photos here show the grass verge where the bus shelter would put in on the north side of the road. This is the existing bus shelter on the south side of the road, where a footway would come in from here across its frontage. And this is looking to the current unmade path. This is the current entrance to the archery field, which would have a new crossover, and then that would be redone as a 1.5 metre metalled footway. That is the scope of the proposals.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we proceed then to the public speaking element of this application. I'd like to call on Tom Langshaw, please, who is an objector, to give us his point of view for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I am speaking on behalf of the local residents of Puckpool, Seaview and Nettleston, who are united with the Parish Council, Ryde Town Council, Council for the Protection of Rural England and our Member of Parliament opposing this scheme. We ask all councillors to listen to the residents and refuse the proposal for the following grounds. 1. Biodiversity assessment is flawed. The NPPF paragraph 120 states that planning decisions should recognise that undeveloped land supports wildlife. The applicant claims that a 17.98% net gain in biodiversity can be achieved. Just a lie. This assessment focuses on foliage only and neglects the many species observed found in abundance on the site, including, but not limited to, bats, dormice, badgers, nightingales, buzzards, foxes, rabbits, red squirrels, herons, pheasants, and moorhens. Grey long-eared bats have been detected. The Isle of Wight is one of the last strongholds of the species, again, not noted in the assessment. Take note, so none of the protected species living on the site are mentioned in the assessment. Insects, birds, and mammals get one mention. And most of all, no detailed assessment of woodland has been made, a major omission. Even with the best possible mitigation measures, human activity on housing estates would drive species away. This assessment is seriously flawed. Number 2, the access, which you just saw. The plan has 2 options. 1, a dangerous access road on a blind bend. That's my house opposite that, and I have small children, and I'm very, very concerned about their safety. Or a new access road with an increased splay, which again you saw, which changes the character of the area forever and further reduces biodiversity. One is dangerous, and the other further invalidates the biodiversity assessment. 3, heritage and protected trees. Island Plan Policy DM2 requires a development to complement the character and surrounding area, yet high density plan requires a 118-metre section of the hedge to be ripped out on the northern boundary. Any development on this site would seriously and irrevocably damage the setting of several listed structures, which you saw, principally the Grade 2 Woodlands Vale Lodge and its listed gardens and Grade 2 heritage buildings Puckpool House and Thornton Cottage, the latter directly adjoins the site. 4, Greenfield site causes settlement coalescence. The planning officer's email to the applicants noted the site had non-previously developed character and is outside the defined settlement boundary, meaning this is a greenfield site, and in its place would create coalescence between Ryde and Seaview, contrary to the council's own 2018 study. In fact, the site is on an old playing field, a sports facility used by many in the area, and as such should not be built on. NPPF paragraph 21 says planning decisions should give substantial weight to the value of using sustainable brownfield land within settlements for homes. The applicant has not demonstrated that all available brownfield sites have been exhausted. 5, lack of affordable housing. Since the question of any development on the site is a reserved matter, there is no certainty that as to what properties will be built there. There may well be minimal contribution to the island's actual housing needs, but from our assessment, this is very, very minimal. Sustainable transport. The NPPF paragraph 105 states that development should be focused on locations for sustainable, limiting the need for travel and offering genuine choice of transport modes. The site is 1.6 miles from Ryde Town Centre. It's far more highly likely this will be a car-dependent development with parking spaces for over 100 or more cars, against local planning policies SP7 and DM17. 6, sewage. NPPF paragraph 169 states the major development should incorporate sustainable drainage systems, yet the scheme proposes connection to the combined sewer. Southern Water's own published data confirms that as recently as the 5th of June, the Apley Park outfall was discharged of untreated sewage for up to 5 hours into the Solent. How can it handle another 50 homes and hardcore sands? So, councillors, once outline permission is granted, it will be very difficult for the planning committee to refuse future applications once whatever they may contain. In conclusion, we, the local residents, urge you to dismiss the application due to 1, a flawed biodiversity assessment, 2, a dangerous access, 3, irreversible damage to built heritage, protected trees and protected fauna, 3, settlement coalescence, further creep, loss of open space that was once a much loved recreational and sports facility, 5, uncertain delivery of affordable housing, 6, the development will be car dependent, and 7, likely insufficient sewage capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Langshaw. That was very good. I'd like to now ask Ed Alsop, representing the agents, please, to give us another 6 minutes of his point of view.
Good afternoon. My name is Ed Alsop. I'm a chartered principal planner at Tetra Tech Europe, and I'm representing the applicant for this application. So as you've heard, this is an outline plan application with all matters reserved except for access for up to 50 new homes, of which 35% will be affordable housing.
And Mr. Alsop, you can speak a little bit louder or closer to the microphone, please.
I'll start from the beginning first. So as you've heard, this is an outline plan application with all matters reserved except for access for up to 50 new homes, of which 35% will be affordable housing, creation of a new access off Puckpool Hill, and the provision of public open space and landscaping. All other matters relating to the scale, detailed design and appearance are aspects for later consideration at reserve matters stage. The site was previously associated with the Harcourt Sands holiday camp immediately north to the site and was used as a miniature golf course. However, the holiday camp closed some time ago and now has planning permission for 128 dwellings and a hotel. Therefore, the site is no longer in use for this purpose and is now disused land. It is accepted by officers that the site is sustainably located on the eastern edge of Ryde, surrounded by existing housing and future housing to be built at Harcourt Sands. It is in close proximity to a number of local services and facilities, including Apley Park, the seafront, local shops and restaurants, Oakville Primary School and local bus services. The site is located within the Ryde Key Regeneration Area as set out in the Council's core strategy. This means the site is located in an area where the Council intend to and have planned the greatest level of development to take place to provide sufficient housing, as these are areas which are most sustainable, respond positively to the settlement boundary and are the least constrained. The Council's expert highway quantity Island Roads confirm that there are no highway or access reasons for refusal. They also confirm that the proposal is well located in transport terms and would not have an unacceptable impact on the highway network. Most importantly, the Council do not have a 5-year housing land supply. This means that the presumption in favour of sustainable development is engaged. The Council's shortcomings in regards to the housing delivery is further evidenced through their failure to meet the housing delivery test over the last 3 years, achieving only 58% of its housing need. This is a real problem and must be addressed. This demonstrates the dire need for greater housing delivery on the island. Therefore, it is crucial to utilise sites which are sustainably located and support those which have received no objection from numerous council experts who have reviewed the planning application, like this site. No objections have been raised by the council's archaeology, ecology, or tree experts. Additionally, Island Roads and public rights of way teams have raised no objection. The application has also been thoroughly reviewed by Historic England, Isle of Wight Gardens Trust, Natural England, and Southern Water, who have all come to the same conclusion of no objection. Notwithstanding this, there are many benefits being put forward in this application, some of which the case officer has already touched on. But there are off-site highway improvements, including the widening of Puckpool Hill carriageway, junction works, bus stop and shelter works along Apley Road, and the provision of uncontrolled crossing points. Upgrading of local footpaths and rights of way. The new homes will be of a highly sustainable design, low carbon housing that is energy efficient and targeted to net zero. Not only is this highly environmentally friendly, but will also mean lower living costs in terms of bills associated with occupying the housing for future residents. A provision of balanced mix of housing will be provided, reflective of local needs, including at least 35% affordable housing. Provision of publicly accessible open space and enhanced landscaping, making an efficient use of disused land to meet local need. a delivery of 18% biodiversity net gain, which exceeds any policy and national guidance, and boosting the local economy both during the construction phase and in the long term, with new residents supporting local services and facilities, which is positive following 2 years of a pandemic. To conclude, the proposal is a form of sustainable development which makes use of unused land and offers significant benefits, particularly through the provision of much needed market and affordable housing on the island. There are no overriding constraints preventing development of the site, and these proposals are supported by council officers. Therefore, it is requested that this application is supported.
Thank you, Mr. Allsop. I'd now like to ask Councillor Patricia Redpath from Seaview Parish Council to again speak for 6 minutes. Thank you.
The report says that it's proposed to connect foul drainage to the existing public sewer at Sandown, thus discharging into the channel, not Solent. It's concluded that this will not add to existing nutrient burdens in the Solent, suggesting that there are burdens in the Solent which are at capacity, and yet the planning application after application are accepted. Liaison with Southern Water is necessary, but there's no reference to this having been done. How can an application be determined on such vagaries? The local ward councillor asked Southern Water outright if they could guarantee not adding to spills in the Solent, and he was told no guarantees could be made, as during storm surge there's no way of knowing where it's coming from. Development adds to problems, and without a guarantee, the whole premise of mitigation and swales dressed up to look good and meaningless. The application site's deemed as an area at low flood risk, and the risk of surface water flooding limited to around the pond. That may be, but what about the neighbouring area? The parish council has been lobbied by local residents about water runoff. Last summer, the Dover flooded 3 times with 2 hours of standing water in the Hersey Nature Reserve. In August, Puckpoor Hill closed due to flooding at the bottom and into the boathouse. Luckily, that surge occurred when the tide was receding, or it would have been worse. There is minimal recognition of the effect of development uphill, and residents of the Dover have seen these increases as development takes place. The developer can promote swales and other mitigations, but not provide the heavy storm. The officers reference concerns of inadequate infrastructure to support cumulative housing development in the locality, but the very real concerns of residents of the effect of the overdevelopment of the area are casually dismissed with a comment that the island has not met the planned delivery of houses and that key stakeholders were warned about increased needs. That patronises the existing communities with a reasonable worries and experience of failure in the existing structure. The site is not in the existing local plan, and nor is it highlighted in the consultation, so it was never factored into infrastructure improvements. The lack of delivery is not a failure of sites coming forward. I calculate more than 1,600 dwellings approved in this facility, not including Rosemary's Vineyard. Losing housing needs could be met several times over. The major problem is non-development, and had they been, they would not be in this situation. It is not the residents' fault, and yet when those come on board, there will be an overload of schools, health services and traffic. The key stakeholders were warned, but what evidence is there of progress? We get promises from developers, but the carrots disappear, and all that's left is more expensive homes plus more second homes. Seaview is 85% second homes, and normal residents have to pay by the diminution of our own environment. Turning to Thornton House, both the archaeological DBA and officers acknowledge there will be a negative effect on this listed property, but is dismissed as no material harm, even an assertion that it will contribute positively to the setting. How on earth can there be positive contribution? The Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act states that planning permission affecting listed buildings or its setting shall have special regard to preserving the building or its setting. It's said that the site has historically been used as playing field, but was last used as a golf course for the former holiday camp. And it's claimed the site hasn't been used as playing field for over 20 years, and therefore it would not result in the loss of public open recreational space. But 20 years is not long, and residents remember it in use, and that the former holiday park use didn't prevent public access. Locals accessed it for formal and informal sport and for walks and picnics. The Sport England playing field policy gives statutory obligation to oppose granting planning permission for development that would lead to the loss or prejudice the use of a playing field or land which had been used as a playing field and remains undeveloped. There's no evidence Sport England have been consulted. Notwithstanding this particular application, the area is set to be increased by approximately 1,600 dwellings. Surely now is not the time to be losing former recreational site opportunity. It could be a level playing field again. And then the tilted balance. We're told no matter what obstacles there are to development, a lack of 5-year housing supply or lack of 75% of housing need means objection is futile and it must be accepted with a heavy heart. That's nonsense. A good case against this proposal can be made. Objectors have cited many reasons. The recognition that delivery does not comply with numbers and rendering the theory that settlement boundaries and supposed sustainable locations must take precedence, there remains lack of recognition that this greenfield site is not an identified location and only considered due to failures to deliver. NPPF paragraph 11 empowers the council to refuse applications when any adverse impact significantly outweighs the benefit. This proposal, on top of the existing permissions, compounds the various problems of infrastructure and potential flooding as referenced, and the local electorate feel these are most definitely adverse impacts on the well-being of their locality and that they outweigh any benefit the proposal can bring alongside the many other developments shortly to take place. It's significant that the Isle of Wight is working on a new IPS, and the message from government is that new regulations are likely to reduce the tilted balance. It's obvious that this proposal has now been put to fast track an approval, knowing that time's running out. If the planning committee concedes now, the residents will unfairly have to suffer the consequences, which won't be overturned.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Redpath. I would now like to invite Councillor Jarman to speak on behalf of the ward councillor, Councillor Adams.
With your permission, Chair, I'll relocate to the other side. Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Good. So I'm addressing you this evening on behalf of Councillor Dave Adams, who's not able to be here because of his health issues. And I've received his instructions. So when I read it out, please hear his voice and not mine. As the ward councillor, I object in the most rigorous terms to this application for outline planning permission on Puckpool Hill playing field. I address the planning committee to amplify the extensive and combined objections of Nettleston and Seaview Parish Council, Ryde Town Council, St Helens Parish Council, and the numerous residents they represent. I further support the objections raised by the Badgers Trust Isle of Wight and the Isle of Wight Back Group regarding loss of their habitat and foraging grounds. I note also the substantive objections of the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England Isle of Wight, Bob Seeley, MP, the Ryde Society, and the 181 objecting comments from residents throughout the locality. There can be no doubt of the veracity and validity of the substantive objections raised. This application does not meet the Island Core Strategy 2012. Specifically, it fails to address points 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8 of the core principles. It does not support sustainable and thriving communities that enable people to enjoy a quality of life without compromising the environment. It does not ensure that all development support the principles of sustainable development. It does not ensure that housing is provided to meet the needs of island residents. It does not promote and enhance community leisure and recreational facilities. It does not protect and conserve and enhance the island's natural, historic, and built environment. Friday's site visit will have made it apparent that the setting and road are not appropriate for this type of development. a green field set amongst listed heritage assets, Thornton Cottage, Woodland Vale House, Puckpool House, which would be irrevocably changed by the proposal. Access to the site is on a clearly dangerous corner, a blind bend from both directions. And work to create visual splays attempting to mitigate the danger will seriously impact biodiversity. The removal of 118 metres of protected hedgerow and mature trees, and even with this extensive loss of habitat, will not provide a safe vehicle access or exit, given the sharp bends to both left and right that you will have seen for yourselves. Safety would demand an even greater hedgerow and tree removal for visibility splays than is currently proposed. The proposed site was long-term pasture land owned by the Isle of Wight Council, which was then sold to Harcourt Sands Holiday Camp specifically as a playing field. While the holiday camp operated, local people had unrestricted access to the site, both for formal and informal sport, but also for walks and picnics. Since the holiday camp closed in 2008, the site has been partially fenced off. This has restricted some local people of a significant sport and recreational asset. The land was used as a golf course, mini golf, for football, rugby and cricket, and more generally recreation. According to national and local policy, quoting Island Plan Policy DM7 and NPPF paragraph 99, Sport England Playing Field Policy and Guidance 2018, there is a statutory obligation to oppose the granting of planning permission for any development which will lead to the loss of or would be prejudicial to the use of all or any part of a playing field or land which has been used as a playing field, as this has, and remains undeveloped, as this is, or land allocated for use as a playing field, unless, in the judgment of Sports England, the development as a whole meets one or more of 5 specific exceptions, none of which are given. There is no evidence that Sports England have been consulted in this way, although this is of course optional. Had they been consulted, then their input may have added valuable details of the history and identified future options of continued sports usage. The National Planning Policy Framework 2021 calls for accessible local services which support health, social and cultural well-being. The local amenities presumed in the original WYG brochure are significantly exaggerated. The nearest bars and restaurants are seasonal. It is unsafe to walk to them in the dark, as there is no continuous pavement in any direction. The nearest shop is 0.8 of a mile away, and doctors' surgeries and schools are at a similar or a greater distance and are already oversubscribed. There is no safe way to cross the road or walk anywhere. Residents would be heavily car dependent in reaching these resources, especially as the increased traffic from Harcourt Sands opposite, 128 houses and 62-bed hotel, the cars from the proposed 50 houses would create a dangerous and busy junction on a narrow and steep road with extremely poor visibility. The development of Westacre, with 475 houses, would add to this problem, as one of the access roads is onto Calthorpe Road. The plan to widen the footpath relies on the use of more greenfield land which does not belong to the applicants. It belongs to the people of the Isle of Wight and is currently used by White Bowmen. These plans would also see the extensive destruction of more established hedgerows, which are recognised and protected as essential habitat for a wide range of species. Public transport is provided by a bus service, the number 8, which operates hourly until 17:45 and is then sporadic. Local residents accept these conditions because we love to live in a rural area. However, this application would destroy a greenfield site and turn us into an unsupported, unsustainable, and unhappy extended suburb of Ryde. On the issue of coalescence, the Isle of Wight Coalescence Study 2018 argues that the island has a unique identity characterized by a predominantly rural landscape, it's clause 1.1, and that the study is designed to address concerns that development will reduce the identity and distinctiveness of settlements and have a suburbanizing effect on the island, section 1.3. This encapsulates our concern as residents of Nettleston and Seaview. We currently live in a predominantly rural environment, the small pockets of post-World War II development having been carefully designed to blend into the landscape and to honour the green boundary between the town of Ryde and the parish of Nettleston and Seaview. The planning officer acknowledges this serious concern in his email to the applicants dated the 1st of November 21, given the site has non-previously developed character and is located outside of the settlement boundary, quote unquote. The new proposal would destroy the green setting of listed buildings, Puckpool House, Thornton Cottage, Woodland Vale House and Gardens, Woodland Vale Lodge. The planning officer email of the 1st of November 21 expressly indicated that he would consult with the principal conservation officer regarding his concern that the applicant had submitted contradictory assessments. No such report or reply to his concern is evident on the planning portal from the conservation officer or team. The overbearing impact of the proposal on residents of Woodland Close must be recognised. Currently, we are surrounded by trees, hedgerows, and green fields. If the proposal goes ahead, the main visual image for the residents would be a hillside covered in houses looking down at us. Once houses are built on the hillside, the privacy and tranquility of our neighbourhood will be lost irrevocably. You will also have noted that this site is outside of the settlement boundary of Ryde and outside of any future currently proposed settlement boundary. On the loss of a greenfield site, the Isle of Wight Core Strategy 2012 states that when considering a greenfield application, the planning committee must ask, quote, has the applicant demonstrated that the scheme enhances the character of the area and landscape? That's the Island Plan Policy SP1, SP5, and NPPF Para 130C. The answer here is an emphatic no. The site is an increasingly precious habitat for a wide range of wildlife. We have regular visits from a colony of red squirrels, a wide variety of bats, owls, lesser spotted and green woodpeckers, jays, foxes, field dormice and buzzards, nightingales, herons, and rich dragonflies. This diversity would be lost and would be replaced by a sterile and under-resourced extended suburb of Ryde. The identity and distinctiveness of Puckpool, Woodland Vale, and Spring Vale would be destroyed. Surely such a proposed development is the essence of unacceptable coalescence, particularly when considered alongside Harcourt Sands, with its 128 houses and 62-bed hotel, and Westacre, with its 475 houses. Another vast greenfield development, both of which are on our doorstep. Addressing ecology and diversity. Since 2008, the proposed site has been fenced off, the only activity being occasional large machinery cutting down trees and undergrowth. Recently, this has taken place prior to the ecology and biodiversity assessments. Many assume this to be an attempt to destroy the habitat prior to its formal evaluation. The period between 2008 and 22 has in many respects allowed the land to rewild and to provide home to a range of wildlife and a point of retreat for the wildlife that lived in Harcourt Sands prior to demolition. The ecology report, the original one, listed a range of flora and fauna specific to the site. And what the applicant's agents describe as scrub is the ideal unimproved grassland essential to attract long grey-eared bats, according to the Wildlife Trust. They have been recorded as foraging the field. There's some pictures attached here, which unfortunately I don't have the ability to show. And regularly noted as roosting nearby. Dormice, other endangered species who need old woodland and well-established hedgerows to survive, have been recorded on the site. Rooting out established hedgerows and cutting down trees for visual space for safe access on and off the site would be bound to destroy this habitat. The applicant's claim of a 17.98% biodiversity net gain when two endangered species who need an undisturbed environment would lose their habitats is ridiculous and absurd. Ironically, the very actions argued as gains, mitigating the significant loss of space for nature by enriching the flora of the site, as suggested in the biodiversity net gain report, would undoubtedly have a serious adverse effect on these species. The long-eared bat is an endangered species. It is estimated that only 1,000 are left in the whole of the UK, and there are only 8 maternity colonies left. This species is under threat because of the loss of foraging grounds. In order to survive, they need unimproved grassland and damp ground where they can hunt for moths. Again, according to the Wildlife Trust. The impact of this proposed development alongside Harcourt Sands on wildlife would be very serious to this endangered species. We must concern ourselves with what happens to the bats. Dormice and badgers, buzzards, owls, red squirrels, and other species which live in or regularly use this site. The application suggests that measures would be taken to minimize the impact on wildlife, but it is not logical to assume that wildlife would stay on the site when major engineering works were undertaken, nor that they would return to a busy housing estate with traffic and people. The work at Harcourt Sands and the proposed Puckpool Hill development would leave our wildlife with nowhere to go. The proposed pond and ecology strips would be closer to features in an urban park than any resemblance of true nature. Furthermore, pouring thousands of tons of concrete to create an underground lagoon could not be seen as protecting and enhancing our natural environment, and it is impossible to imagine how this could improve biodiversity. In order to adapt to climate change and to create a low or no carbon economy, we need to maximize the use of our green spaces. The community would like to buy the land and restore it as a public green space with protected habitats for wildlife, with space for planting more trees and for carbon capture, for nature education, and for leisure and recreation. Our own policies and the national commitments direct us to a zero carbon model. There is no carbon impact or mitigation assessment provided for this site. And while these are not yet formal local policy, this development would create significant carbon impact whilst removing the natural environment that mitigates it. Turning to traffic. The traffic survey submitted with the plan says that there would only be 9 cars per hour leaving the site at peak times. These cars would join the 135 vehicles we recorded travelling on the road during a 1-hour period between 8:30 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. on Thursday, the 9th of June. We also recorded the same number on Saturday, the 10th of June between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. Adding together the 135 vehicles with the predicted 9 vehicles per hour from the playing field development and the 23 from Harcourt Sands houses and the vehicles from the 65-bed hotel, we arrive at a minimum of 177 vehicles on Pugpool Hill per hour at peak time. This is not by any measure a safe or acceptable prospect. Addressing the issue of affordability, I note the ambiguity of commitment in the report to affordable housing. Local properties regularly sell now for £800,000, which using the national 80% basis would result in affordable properties, quote unquote, selling for £640,000. This is clearly not affordable to island residents and hence does not, by any margin, meet the local need. There are multiple and wide-ranging specific policy issues noted and expanded on above that are available to justify and substantiate rejection of this application. I therefore ask that you support our combined parish and town councils and significant numbers of objecting residents and reject this cynical planning application. Councillor Dave Adams.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Jarman, for reading Councillor Adams's deposition. And you're now returning back to your place in the committee. It was a very thorough case by Councillor Adams. Now, where are we? I think we're on to the actual debate now, aren't we? First of all, I'd ask, do any members of the committee have any further questions, any further clarifications they'd like to ask at this point before we go into debate? Councillor Quigley.
It is customary to let the officer respond to the comments, and that might be nice to let him have that, but I do have some questions that I'd
Thank you very much, Councillor. I do appreciate your experience. This is my first planning meeting as chairman, and I very much appreciate your help and guidance. Yes, but Mr. Kuhlenberg, would you like to respond to any of the points that have been made?
Thank you, Chairman. Much of the issues raised were actually covered in the officer report, so I won't repeat what's been covered in the officer report already. I would like to make one point, which was a reference that the local member made to discussion with the council's principal conservation officer. And I would advise that his advice is contained in the report, forms part of our officer recommendation. It actually forms a lot of the heritage section of this report.
Okay, so I come back to my previous point. Are there any questions? Councillor Quirk.
It's been raised in several comments about the sharp bend and the problems of that, and it didn't seem that sharp a bend to me. And with the hedgerow being moved backwards, appeared to me to address the issue. Can we actually see the image again of what it will be like when it's actually moved back?
Is that possible?
So, Councillor Quirk, this is the access arrangement here. This is the current carriageway alignment. Members note visibility displays through here. So you'll see how the carriageway is actually, the bend is being reduced through here. So the existing carriageway alignment is kind of here where my cursor is, and the new alignment set back here about 1.5 meters.
So could we clarify with Adam Bose that the vision displays are meeting the requirements?
Can you use the microphone, please?
Okay. Yeah, and the manual for streets, the visibility display for a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit is 43 meters in either direction. I believe this provides 52 meters, so it's actually in excess of what is the requirement.
Can I have another one?
Councillor Quirk?
Second question, the houses around, as we heard, sell for many hundreds of thousands of pounds. And it's quite likely that a developer would quite like to put nice big houses like that on the site. That doesn't meet our housing need. Is it reasonable to put a condition on that whatever is built on this site has to be consistent with the latest housing needs assessment of the council?
Thank you, Councillor Clerk. Officers would advise that actually the final housing mix can be dealt with through the reserved matters. So officers and the council can ensure through the reserved matters that the final design, final housing design would meet the or be reflected below.
Reserved matters, it's a bit late. I think we should give a clear indication in conditions that we would expect the housing that's put forward to meet the local housing needs if this is approved, personally.
Ms. Gillenberg? Any way you can advise?
I believe, unless Councillor Quirk needs any response to that, I mean, ultimately we can't, members could put a condition on. I think, my discussion with my legal colleague there was that actually what we can do, and perhaps is more appropriate, is informative, which actually draws attention to our policies and a plan that require developments to meet a local need.
And informative, can you explain a bit more?
Yeah, so it's basically a note, effectively a statement on the decision notice, which doesn't form part of the planning conditions, but effectively draws attention to any applicant or developer who wishes to go in reserved matters that actually what we are looking for from the council, as a council, is for the final mix to meet a local need, which is already enshrined within our policies and our local plan.
Councillor Quirk, carry on.
If it is done that way, can we have an assurance from the chair that should this be approved, it would be brought back to committee at reserved matter stage? You can do that.
I can do that, but I don't know how. I mean, we could be talking a great number of years. We have no idea when this application will come to that particular position, when I will probably not be here. So I'm not sure how valuable that is.
If it's minuted that the chairman wants it to happen, I suspect that officers would honour that, even if you're not there anymore.
I'm sure I'll get some help from Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to confirm that we would generally work on the principle that with an application of this sort of scale, if it was heard outlined and approved by the planning committee, then when we looked at reserved matters, in all likelihood, we would be bringing it back to the committee to ensure that that final decision reflected the original committee decision.
Thank you, Ms. Bolter. Councillor Oliver, please.
Yeah, can I have some confirmation on the road layout? You've got the road upgrades will be part of this application. I was under the impression the road upgrades were part of the application for Harcourt Sands, so that becomes a little bit spurious as far as this application is concerned. The only difference we can see on this one is actually the access splay, not the road upgrades.
Thank you, Councillor Oliver. You are correct. The highway carriageway widening works and the off-site works, which comprise the footway and the bus on Apley Road, are all part of the Harcourt development as well. They are part of this application as well, because ultimately they are required to make this development acceptable in terms of highways terms, and therefore they need to form part of these proposals so that this application stands on its own merits as well. There are some additions in terms of the contribution towards the footpath improvement through to Apley Park, which is an addition. But otherwise, the off-site works are the same as what was envisaged within the Harcourt development to support the Harcourt development.
Would you like to come back?
So is this a bolt-on application to the Harcourt Sands application that has already gone through? The road upgrade is going to happen whether this application goes through or not, surely.
This application has to stand on its own merits. So again, the highways works are required to make this development acceptable on its own right, irrespective of Harcourt. In terms of the phase, in terms of delivery of Harcourt, that will obviously depend on how that progresses, and at which time the highways works are required as part of that other development. But ultimately, what's before members is this application, and it works to support this application going forward.
Thank you. I've got a number of names on my list. I hope you're asking questions still at this point. I'd like to. The first person I noticed was Councillor Churchman. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Could you please confirm the settlement boundary, which I think is Councillor Lilly's ward, Elmfield, and where's the settlement boundary with regard to Seaview?
So members note that the application site is starred here. The actual settlement boundary is across here, which is about 270 metres to the west of the application site. Seaview actually doesn't have a settlement boundary, so this is a settlement boundary here of Ryde. This is the extent of the key regeneration area of Ryde. There's no settlement boundary defined for Seaview.
Just another question. I know that Harcourt Sands has permission. Can you confirm how many properties will be built on Harcourt Sands? And actually, to add something else, am I correct in saying it's 470 properties at Westacre? And how close is Westacre actually to the current application?
I think that's Hillenburg. It could be shown on the map. We have them already here. Those I can see Westacre Farm on your description on this picture here.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the actual proximity to Westacre, I don't actually know that. But in terms of the numbers for Hardcourt, it does say at paragraph 1.1 in terms of the history that it's to provide 128 dwellings, a 63-bed hotel, and 415 holiday units.
Okay, my next person I've got on my list is Councillor Spink, please.
Thank you, Chair. Really following up from Councillor Quirk's question, there does seem from reading the report that there are a number of matters which would have to be determined by reserve matters. Is it, my experience of outline planning applications is not huge. I think it's the first one that I've sat on. I'm concerned by that because a number of the reserve matters, in my view, relate to very important issues. Is it a ground for refusing an outline planning permission that there are too many reserve matters and therefore the committee is not sufficiently informed? For example, biodiversity will have to be subject to further negotiation of reports. Affordable housing, as raised by Councillor Quirk, will have to be noted by way of information on the decision notice. I mean, these are fundamental planning concerns. And my concern is that if we agree it as an outline, and then all these reserve matters can't be satisfactorily resolved, what then is the outcome? We've already granted permission.
Mr. Bolton.
There you go. Apologies. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Spink, for the question. I think what we would advise is that whilst there are pros and cons with the different routes that an applicant can take to securing planning permission, the route of an outline and then a reserve matters is an established route and they are entitled to take that. And it is not as prescriptive for us to be able to dictate which matters are dealt with up front in terms of the outline, and equally which matters then follow on in the subsequent reserve matters application. However, what we can say, and as I'm sure members of the committee are aware, the application in front of us is an outline application. So we are actually talking about the principle of development on that site, and the one detail that we're in front of us today is in terms of access. Now, it may be that the committee may consider that the headline principle of development is acceptable. However, it may be that when the reserve matters come in, there may be issues that are unacceptable, and therefore the reserve matters application would be refused. And that is perfectly acceptable approach. So I think that there was a comment earlier that effectively granting the outline permission effectively, should we put it, opened the door and gave us nowhere to turn. I wouldn't agree with that assessment of the situation.
Would it be correct in law for if the committee were concerned by it being dealt with almost entirely by reserve matters, would it be a proper ground for declining permission or refusing permission for an outline application?
Yeah, as my colleague, Mr. Gard, has helpfully reminded me, effectively, we have a appropriately made and submitted application in front of us that we then ultimately have to determine. And as I previously said, we cannot refuse simply on lack of full information or the type of information we would expect with a full application, because that is not the type of application we are dealing with today.
Thank you. Our next question is coming from Councillor Jarman.
Yes, I was going to ask a question about the issues raised about discharge and nitrates and the combined sewer overflows. You seem to have very little information to base that question on at this stage, which I accept will come later. So instead of that, if I could refer you back to the photograph you had of the road, please, if we could see that one more time. No, the one just of the entrance with red dotted lines on it. Keep going, I think. Yeah. No, back. There, that's it. So I know this shows where the entrance would be and the area that would serve for that entrance and exit. But the picture is taken from the view of a pedestrian, obviously on the pavement on the opposing side of the road. I wonder if you had a picture, what would be the view of a car driver? And of course, in this country, we drive on the left-hand side of the road, coming up that hill, approaching that junction, to show what the visibility would be from the driver's eye view, which would have indicate to me that the visibility would be quite challenging as the road actually bends away to the left-hand side. And I know we're concerning ourselves here specifically with that element of the application, so this would seem to be quite material.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. I don't actually have a photo that I can show you this afternoon. Members obviously would have visited the site and had a look at the access point themselves. Island roads, I'd repeat, island roads aren't objecting on visibility and safety of the access arrangement. They are have deemed it to be acceptable. The plans show compliant visibility displays, and that is what we provide in condition.
Thank you. One moment, Councillor Spink. I've got another question from in the queue. Okay. Councillor Matt Price.
Chairman, first of all, apologies for being late. I did expect to be late and understand that that's removed my right to vote. But I just wanted to inquire whether I still have a right, haven't attended the site visit, but I appreciate I missed the beginning of the presentation. Do I have a right to participate in the debate? I think previously I've been told not, but I thought I'd just ask and clarify that.
I'm afraid we can't give you an immediate answer, Councillor Price. Can we just, you can give us a few minutes while we have a little think about that one? I thought you came in quite early, before we got into the meat of things, but I'm not quite sure now. I'll have to leave it to my colleagues there.
Do we have an adjournment? I suspect that
Councillor Brodie.
the issue that Councillor Price refers to is contained within the code of practice, which is pretty much redundant on this committee these days after the approach of certain councillors voting on applications within their ward, the fact that you no longer have to attend site inspection, formal site inspection, which I no longer do. I appraise myself of the sites myself. So therefore, I would suggest that since the code of practice is now pretty much redundant, Matt Price can do what he likes. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Brodie, I'm waiting for some advice from our legal officer before we proceed. If you bear with us.
We have an adjournment.
Adjournments, yes. Thank you very much indeed. I do apologise for not setting a time for that adjournment, but I think everyone's back in the room now. We did notice that it was 19 minutes after 4 that Councillor Price joined us, but we had actually started the presentation. I'm going to ask Mr. Guard to explain what we've been talking about all this time, and then pass back to Councillor Price. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Very grateful for the brief adjournment, so I could give Councillor Price some legal advice on the matter, the question put before us. I have now given Councillor Price that legal advice, and you may wish to hand over to him for a brief statement.
Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you everyone else for the time allowed to discuss this. I've been on this committee for 9 years, and I've tried to attend everything and be as on time as I can. I have good knowledge of this site, I feel. I was on the site visit. I've read the officer's report. I also have prior knowledge from being on the Harcourt Sands application. And so I've previous knowledge of that site and the relationship to this site. In my time on this committee, I have observed times when members have been late and have missed parts of the officer presentation. And the convention has always been that if you miss any element of the officer presentation and any of the public speaking, that you don't vote. There's been an issue about whether you then can join the debate or not. I feel I absolutely have the right to join the debate and ask questions. But the convention, for the time I've been on this committee, would tell me that I probably shouldn't vote. I won't say ultimately I won't vote, but at this moment, I think it would be unwise for me to vote. But I'll make that decision later on. I certainly won't abstain. I just won't participate in the vote if I get to that point, because I don't abstain at planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Would you like to tell us ask your question?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. What it was, going back to something Councillor Oliver mentioned about the road layout. I think what he was asking, and probably didn't get the answer he was after, I think I might be entirely wrong, but I think the question was that if this application was refused, would the road layout, in a similar manner to what we've seen in this application, still have to go ahead to enable the already approved Harcourt Sands application, which I think is a really important thing to hear. Thank you.
We have actually answered that question already, but shall I ask Mr. Ransom to, or who shall I ask? Stuart, Mr. Kuhlenberg, just to.
Let's say the off-site works, including the footway works, the carriageway widening at Upwell Hill, the off-site works on Appley Road, form part of Harcourt. They're required to support the Harcourt development, and therefore, should the Harcourt development progress, then those works will be expected to be delivered to support that development.
Councillor Lilly.
Thank you, Chair. I've got one or two questions. One about the Sports England. It was sort of raised by a number of the objectors and by the parish councils about that. It was up until the late 90s a public access playing field. I remember it in the 70s. I played a cricket match there. And also played football there. And Councillor Stevens was telling me also that he experienced it. So from the information that was given by the representative from the parish council, even though it hasn't been a playing field for many years, shouldn't have there been consultation with Sports England to at least check whether they would have an objection or not. Because I do feel that there was some ambiguity that was raised on that. That's my first question.
Thank you. We'll take that question first, I think. Is that one for Mr. Kuhlenberg again?
As Councillor Lilly, the council is only required to consult Sport England in a case where it would result in the loss of an existing playing field or a field that has been used within the last 5 years as such. This site hasn't been used for a playing field, looking at the information provided, for at least 20 years. The last known use was a golf course, and the golf course does not fall within the definition of a playing field.
Thank you. Can I have your second question, please, Councillor Lilly?
Yes. Regarding overdevelopment and what would be seen as over development. In the 2012 island strategy, RIDE, taking the view that this application has more relation to the development in RIDE than to Seaview or Nettleston, being that it's on the parish boundary. The figure for 2012 was 2,100 houses. In the proposed draft plan, it's considerably less. If you take all the planning applications that have been passed, either full or outline, and houses built between from 2012, the figure comes to over 2,657. So if all the planning, outline planning or full planning permissions go together before this application, isn't the figure 2,657 over development?
Mr. Bolter will answer that question.
Thank you. Well, I might start by answering the question with a further question, just for clarification on those figures, Councillor Lilly, if I may. So just to recap, so I make sure I got it right. The figure was 2,657. Thank you. And for further clarification, was that the combined total of permissions and completions, or was that solely permissions? Okay, thank you. That's helpful to know, because that obviously then informs how we think about those numbers and that impact. So I think the first thing that I would observe then in responding to that question is that by referencing permissions and completions, you're potentially double counting some numbers.
Taking that into consideration with my town council, who've actually checked the figures for me.
Okay, if you're satisfied that they're correct, then fair enough. I think that would then move us on to the second point that we start to think about, and it comes back to that point that's covered in the report that deals with SP1 and SP2 and whether they are up to date and the weight that we can give them. So I think what we would be saying to that is that the 2012 core strategy set out that figure, and I would note that it is delivered broadly in accordance with the following distribution, so it doesn't tie it down exactly to the 2,100 figure. But what we're looking at is that we are in a situation, as I know that all members of the committee are aware, where we have both an undersupply of housing land and we are not meeting the housing delivery test. So I think because when we think about those factors, the weight that we give to delivery, regardless of how it may or may not accord with the broad split identified in SP2, we've got to give, we would be giving more significant weight to the under delivery.
Thank you. You want to come back, Councillor?
Yes, I've got just two other questions I'd particularly like to raise. On the basis of that, Mr. Bolter, how do we? I'll come back to that. I'll do my next question actually, so I clarify that one in my head. It was regarding the roads, right? Within that area, Apley Road and the top of Buckpool Hill sort of goes along and then it goes straight down. And there have been, I can remember since about 2016, a regular flash floods of water that then just streams down Buckpool Hill. And there have been many complaints and things to Island Roads about flash flooding that actually goes down that area, which actually leaves a huge pool of water at the top, which means that there are things like the bus stop and that are completely flooded within that period. And this happens yearly at times the torrential rain that we do get in that area. So my question to Island Roads, have they fully taken that into consideration, and have they actually put forward in the Harcourt and this development proposals to mitigate or actually resolve that issue of flash flooding?
Mr. Ransom, sorry.
Yeah, right. I was asked a specific question by Neil, who were, my boss at Island Roads in the development control team, who was on the planning committee site meetings, and I think there's been a bit of misinformation because when he said the bus stops, when he was talking to me, he was referring to ones in Apley Road. So that's what I investigated. Now, the ones in Apley Road, the only flooding issue that we know about was when white fibre damaged the gullies down there, which has now been rectified. So, so that was the only one that I actually found information out about. I've got no information about flash flooding over at the top of Buckpool Hill, I'm afraid. That wasn't the information that was given to me to look into. So, but with this development, where it's outlined, the drainage really hasn't been taken into consideration because that's under reserve matter. Now, obviously, there'll be drainage basically in Buckpool Hill, which is just going to be a slight widening. So there will be a slight increase in the amount of sort of like hard surface where the water will obviously be collected in the gully points. And I'm sure that the officer who looked at this report took that into consideration. So, but in regards to your specific question about the flash flood, I'm afraid I don't have the information.
Thank you, Mr. Ransom. Councillor Spink, you wanted to speak next.
Thank you. Councillor Dave Adams, in his speech, kindly read by Councillor Jarman, referred to the element of affordable housing being, I can't remember the precise word, but somewhat in doubt. And certainly in the design and access statement, it was initially, as I understand it, the intention of the applicant to seek a financial assessment to show that he could not afford, or they could not afford, to provide affordable housing. I haven't seen anything in the papers other than in the case officer's report, anything to contradict that. So if we were to approve this matter, this application, what is the position on the delivery of 35% as a minimum affordable housing? Would it still be open to the applicant to seek a financial assessment as a reserved matter?
Thank you, Councillor Spink. Who would like to take this one?
In terms of development viability, there was an assessment done originally, came with the application that was reviewed by officers, and in discussions with the applicant, it has now been agreed that 35%, will be delivered as part of the scheme, and that will be secured through Section 106 agreement. So, as far as we're concerned, as far as the applicant is concerned, this is a viable site to deliver that 35%, and that's what's being proposed.
Sorry, following up from that, if I may, following on from Councillor Quirk's question, and it's probably my fault, but Councillor Quirk, I think, was making the point that if the houses sell for 800,000 and there's a 20% discount, 600,000 or whatever it is, doesn't make them affordable. Now, to what extent can we, on an outline application or indeed on a full application, specify that they need to be affordable to a local need?
I think I would advise councillors that, you know, we will through the Section 106 agreement secure the affordable housing. That will require an affordable housing scheme to be agreed at a later date with the council, which will set out the tenure and mix of that housing. It will also effectively at outline stage, it will allow the developers to talk to housing associations to actually and affordable housing providers to actually work out the mix that would be put forward as part of that affordable housing scheme. So we will secure the 35% affordable housing. At this stage, in terms of local need, what I would caution members is that we are at an outline stage. The details of the housing delivery are reserved for later consideration. It's at that point that we will make sure through that and also through the Section 106 affordable housing scheme that what is delivered on site will reflect needs. Now that might be discount market housing, it could be rented, social rented or affordable rented housing, and that would be set out within an affordable housing scheme that will be agreed at a later date.
Well, can it actually be specified that it should be affordable according to the needs of the locality? So in other words, for example, the affordable rent, can that be specified that it will be affordable by those on the housing register?
While the gentlemen here are discussing, I'd like to involve Sarah Wilkinson, who's said she can help us with this one. So I ask Sarah to give us your opinion.
Sorry, thank you, Ollie. That was better. You should now be able to hear me. I'm going to answer your questions completely directly because I think you've asked two questions and I'm just going to give you absolute straight back answers to both of them. In relation to the first question on can they seek a reduction or a variation later? In practice, yes, in that what would happen is that, but it would ultimately come back to members, the councillors. What would happen is if we were to approve the application this evening with a requirement for a Section 106 agreement for 35% on-site affordable housing, they would have to sign up to that before we issue the decision. If they wish to alter that, they would have to amend the legal agreement. They could do that through the reserve matters application, and obviously that would come back to the committee, or they would have to do it by request. And to do that, they would have to then submit the viability information to demonstrate that why they considered that previously they could provide it and subsequently they can't. Bearing in mind they've previously provided that information and we've resolved that they can't demonstrate that it's not viable to provide 35%. So the application would have a legal agreement with it. They would have to vary that legal agreement if they wanted to change the provision for affordable housing. So we'd have to go through those stages in that process and then reassess at that point with the correct information. In terms of the require it to meet a local need, affordable housing is defined within the NPPF, both in terms of social rent, in terms of affordable rent and anything else. We have to ensure that any decision complies with the NPPF in the first instance. Our local plan follows what the NPPF is. So currently, our policy stipulates the definition of what affordable housing is, and all agreements that we issue, 106 agreements, use the definition of the NPPF for affordable housing. I would suggest it would be, we are not in a position at the moment, based on our current policies, to require a greater provision. So I'd say that it would be challenging at this point, based on our policies, to suggest that affordable rent should be 40% market value, not 20%. 40% reduction, not 20% reduction, which is the current NPPF definition of affordable rent. That is about the policy, the changing the policies potentially between the core strategy and the island planning strategy to assess a different definition locally. We don't currently have that. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkinson.
Thank you.
Regard.
Thank you, Chairman. I have just a brief addition to what my colleague Sarah Wilkinson said, which may provide also some assistance in terms of the Section 106 agreement. And so once, if the committee will monitor grant planning permission subject to a Section 106 agreement which secure 35% affordable housing, it's quite right, as has been identified to you, that the local planning authority can agree to vary an existing Section 106 agreement. But that's by agreement, and it's within its rights to refuse to do that. The second limit by which a Section 106 agreement can be varied is under Section 106A of the Town and Country Planning Act, which enables a formal application to be made to the local planning authority to vary the terms of a Section 106 agreement. But that application cannot be made until a period of 5 years has passed from when the original planning permission has been granted. So you have the protection of the 5-year term for the formal application outside of any other agreement that you make. And the distinction I make on that is simply that if under the formal application procedure, that's where the appeal route comes in. But essentially what it does is, unless the planning authority say agree to any change, it fixes the period for 5 years within which that what was originally placed on the planning permission has to remain.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guard. And Mr. Bolton.
Just to add to what Ms. Wilkinson has said, I'm afraid we don't have the tools in our toolbox at the moment to sort of allow that to happen in the current plan. This is exactly what is being looked at in the draft island planning strategy, and there are new tools to deal with exactly this issue in exactly the way that you've outlined. But I'm afraid, Councillor Smith, we don't have those to hand at the moment.
Thank you very much for all your elucidation there. I'm going to go back to Councillor Jarman, because apparently he had an extra question, or I don't know if you will carry on with all.
Yes, thank you. My summary of the earlier one, the answer is no, but we cannot define affordable housing based on the average salary or affordable to islanders. Sometimes a simple answer really helps a great deal, and I would implore the officers when they're giving answers to try and answer as directly as they can. If there is an answer and the word is no or the word is yes, I think often that is completely satisfactory. So my follow-up question was relating to the question which has been raised about coming back to road, which is the core issue for discussion today, after all. It would be very helpful, based on the questions that have come before, to see a map of the area which shows the extant planning permissions already granted in that area, specifically with relation to the development boundary, noting that this site is not adjacent to the development boundary directly at all. Do we have a map that shows those extant, whether it's 2,637 or whatever? Do we have a map that actually shows their distribution in the locality, just to show us what the impact is really going to be visually? That would be very helpful.
Mr. Bolton.
Thank you. Unfortunately, and sticking to a simple answer, no. But what I would also do, Councillor Jarman, if you don't mind, is I would just, I suppose, come back to the point when we talk about where certainly this site, in terms of the application in front of us, is in relation to the settlement boundary. Again, you'll be aware through the report and the other items that we've had over recent times, the way that we are considering and how we use the settlement boundary at the moment, given the fact that we are operating under the tilted balance.
Thank
you. Councillor Quirk.
Yeah, there was a point in Councillor Adams' report, and it's raised by the Bat Society people about the grey long-eared bats. Is there any evidence that there are any grey long-eared bats in this area?
I believe there is evidence that grey long-eared bats are operating in the area. Obviously, so the answer is yes, I guess, to that question.
Thank you. Is that okay for you? Then it's Councillor Lee again. Yes.
My question is, Seaview and Nettleston is probably the highest area of second homes in on the Isle of Wight. It's recognised as an issue by the planning department. And there's also an increase, particularly in Ryde, of rented accommodation being withdrawn for Airbnb, which is significant. Ryde recently has lost nearly 83% of private rented accommodation. And there are families that are being evicted that are actually coming into the need of the local authority, where their landlord is given them notice to then go to B&B. This site is very desirable within that area for Airbnb because it's very easy access to the beach and an area. What could be put into a Section 106 that prevented the housing being sold for second homes and Airbnb, right? Yeah.
I think we're working out who's going to answer the question. Councillor Lilly, it was obviously a very good question. It doesn't have an obvious answer.
That's what it will be, Matt, too.
I'm going to ask Ms. Wilkinson to kick us off. I think there may be various opinions, but it would be nice to get a response to that query.
Thank you, Chairman. I think effectively the answer is probably no in terms of that short answer. The situation we have is that for any condition we place on an application, there has to be a policy basis to do that. We do not currently have a policy that stipulates we would restrict residential development within particular areas to first home, to not be second homes. The difficulty we have is what we're doing is approving C3 use. So planning is a use. It's ultimately you're approving use of land, and in this instance they're applying to use the land for residential development, which falls within C3 use. Airbnb, second homes, everything like all fall within that use class. It is solely the same use class. It is something that the government are aware of as an issue, certainly with Airbnb, and are looking at whether they should fall within a different use class. But at the moment, they don't. They're still classed as residential. So we can't, without a policy background, control the use of a dwelling to not be a dwelling. Because we just don't have that kind of, we can't link it to anything. We can't, you'll see that every policy, every condition that comes in front of you will say in accordance with policy, and it will stipulate one. We don't have a policy to do that at present. So it would be, the answer, the advice would be no, but that the advice from officers would be no.
Okay, I think that's quite clear. Is that okay with everybody else? You're in the huddle, Mr.
Sorry, one very quick thing. And it's just to confirm that the affordable housing is slightly different in that there'll be clauses in the Section 106 agreement which requires them to be used only for affordable housing and for no other use. So they will be secured by covenants in Section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Guard. I'd like to ask Councillor Brodie to ask his question, please.
Just very quickly, Chair, and we've had a lot of discussion about affordable housing, and I think it was mentioned that the prime issue was highways. But if we look at the recommendations before us tonight, on page 40, paragraph 8.1, first bullet point, we'll be seeking a section 106 that would include 35% on-site affordable housing. Is it not the case that in the past, this committee, in the recent past, this committee has made specific definition of the sort of affordable housing we'd want to see, i.e. a certain percentage rented, a certain percentage shared ownership, etc. I'm just concerned that we're not clarifying that tonight, and that the red herring raised by Councillor Adams, that, you know, the only affordable housing is going to cost you 600,000 is going to be listened to by people. Is it the case that we can actually specify, which if we do decide to approve this application, that a certain percentage of that 35% can be for rent and perhaps for shared ownership or other models? Thank you, Chair.
I remember that being done before, Councillor Brodie, but I'll pass this on to Mr. Bolger.
Thank you, Chairman. And in the spirit of short answers, yes, Councillor Brodie.
Councillor Christensen.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from Councillor Quirk's comment about the bats as well, I was wondering if there's any information about the effectiveness of the bat and bird boxes and trying to rehome them, to say whether that actually works or not, because if we have actually got bats there and they're feeding, and I'd just like to know some of the research into that, please.
Mr. Kuhlenberg.
The answer to that is no. I don't have information on the effectiveness of these things tonight. However, what I can say is that the Council's Ecologist has reviewed the proposals for biodiversity enhancements, the recommendations in the ecology report, and hasn't objected to the application and has advised that those measures should be secured. Bat boxes and the like are very common sort of mitigation measures that are commonly accepted and are often recommended by ecologists. They're commonly accepted by the local planning authority and the council's ecology officer. So that they are only one of a package of wider measures to mitigate impacts on bats, which obviously members will see from the report and the ecology report that was produced. That will also include new planting around, particularly around site perimeter, development design at a later stage through reserve matters, which would particularly look at proximity to boundaries, orientation of dwellings, design of dwellings, minimising light spill, and that kind of thing. So these are all sorts of measures that are being put forward to mitigate impact on bats, and which would be secured through the planning conditions and the reserve matter stage.
I've got another question as well, please.
Yes, have your second question, Councillor Chris.
Thank you, Chair. It's concerning the road access, really, and that we're then going to be encouraging people to cross the road, and I don't see a crossing included in this. We're talking about the proximity to schools and people walking to schools, and I feel like if we talk about the amount of road layout that we're changing, that a crossing should be part of this application at this stage. Thank you.
Members know on the plans, there are proposals for uncontrolled crossing points, one directly across the access from Putpool Hill, south side to the north side. So that's effectively to the widened from the site entrance to the north side where the widened pavement would be. That widened pavement would then be improved by the compliant footway all the way through to Appley Manor, effectively. And then it would join the existing metal footway that leads to Oakville Primary School. So there would be a control point to the north side of Putpool Hill, and then a compliant footway that would lead around Thornton Cross, along Appley Road to Appley Manor, and then onward to the local primary school.
They were uncontrolled crossings. I'm talking about having a zebra crossing, because we're talking about elderly people, children trying to cross that road where it was quite a bend. And I would like to see that included in this application. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, if there is
if members consider that there needs to be another crossing point, then they could potentially make that a condition. However, what I would advise councillors is that the highways arrangements and proposals have been subject to consultation with Island Roads. Island Roads are not objecting to the crossing designs, visibility space and the highway arrangements that form part of this application.
Maybe you can bring that one up later, Councillor Christensen. Could you turn off your microphone, please? That's all the people I have down for questions. Does anybody else wish to ask a question? Yes, Councillor Churchman.
Just a quick one. We're talking about possibly 50 houses one side of the road. Am I correct in saying there is no footpath on the side of the road where the houses are? So the question about crossing the road, I think is very relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'd like to now move on. I'm noticing it's we've been discussing this for 2 hours and it's a 3-hour meeting. Now it's the stage of trying to come to a common view. I prefer, rather than taking motions which then have to be amended and it all gets very complicated, I prefer if we could come up with a general feel of the committee and get an idea of objectives so that we can kind of come together in a collective motion, perhaps towards the, after a debate. So would anybody like to kick us off with any thoughts on how they would like this to move forward?
Well, I would like, whatever motion comes forward, I want the access thought about for going forward, the amount of houses that are proposed in that area, that there is more safety measures put in or crossing the road.
Councillor Churchman.
So we can now go into debate. Yes. Right. I personally am against this development for the following reasons. It's quite a long way outside the settlement boundary. We had this discussion with Westacre. Westacre originally got permission because it was adjacent to the settlement boundary. This is at least 1/8 of a mile away. It was and should still be a recreation ground. It is a greenfield site, and apparently Mr. Gove, in his wisdom, now that he's taken over, has abandoned the proposals for zonal planning and amended the targets to concentrate house building on brownfield sites in cities. So I want to make that point to everybody. So with drainage, I think there is a possibility. I've been down that road when it's been flooded. I personally don't think the local infrastructure can cope. Now we're talking about an area of probably a square mile, maybe 2 square miles, 475 houses at Westacre, a possible 900 at Pennyfeathers, 121 at Harcourt Sands, plus a 63 bedroomed hotel. Quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, where are all these cars going to be? And don't talk to me about bikes. We'll be lucky if 8% of the population ever get on bicycles. So those are my objections, and I object to only 35% of affordable housing. That means out of 50 houses, 17 will be affordable, in quotes, which I would have said if we're going to approve it at all, we should ask them 50%. But however, I think that sums up my feelings, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. That's very clear. Mr. Bolt would like to respond.
Thank you. Well, it's just to pick up on a couple of points that Councillor Churchman has raised. The first one is the observation that it is a long way away from the settlement boundary. I think we've had the discussion this evening and in relation to previous applications, and I would simply refer you to paragraph 6.6 of the officer's report that talks about the way that we deal with settlement boundaries at the moment versus whether it is in a sustainable location. You've obviously mentioned changes being mooted at the national level through Michael Gove, and there's been an awful lot in the press recently about some changes or proposed changes. However, I would obviously sort of caution and advise that we are here to deal with the application in front of us under the current local and national planning policy that is in place today. And then on my final point that I'd just like to cover off is, whilst I recognise the view and the sentiment behind the point around affordable housing, I would just highlight that under current policy, the provision of 35% of affordable housing is policy compliant. So actually, I think that would be a very difficult reason for a refusal for us to sustain. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bolter. Would anyone else like to join in? Okay, Councillor Quirk.
I take a slightly different view to Councillor Churchman. This is a site that is within the regeneration area of Ryde. It's not a site that has been used as a playing field of any sort for many, many years, and I'm not aware that any moves have been taken to actually get it as a community asset and turn it into that. There are other green spaces nearby. We cannot build all of the houses we need on the brownfield sites that we have identified at this point in time. I hear the comments about badgers and foxes and squirrels. I live in an urban area in Shanklin. I have an entrance to a badger set in my garden. Foxes quite regularly come through, and when we kept chickens, they used to take one every so often. And we have red squirrels, and they probably eat more of our walnuts than we do. They're not incompatible. It's what you do and how you do it. I'm quite concerned, along with Councillor Spink, that this is so general that we're really not getting enough of the feel for this. And if you'd allowed his suggestion, I would have voted against it. But I actually think the principle of development here is actually acceptable. It's a site that's surrounded by hedgerow. It will be still surrounded by hedgerow, even though it's going to be moved back. And I think we need housing. We need affordable housing. That's why I think we need to build and insist that they build in terms of the housing need of the latest housing need assessment. So they're not building 5-bedroom houses that go for £800,000. They're building smaller houses that people actually have a chance of affording in the first place. And that might not be good news for the local residents who like their £800,000 real estate. But all of the arguments we've heard tonight was applied when the existing houses were built.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I listened very closely to what's gone on this evening, and I think there is a very clear general sentiment coming out. The key questions for me, really, that are left open is I find a lot of problems with the load on the road here. I clearly think that this does not meet a local need in delivering what we need on the island that is affordable to islanders. And I'm mindful of our inability, according to policy and other issues that have been clarified, to put such restrictions on it. And finally, that as at this stage of an application, there are far too many what I would see as critical open issues for me to go along with it. And I think if this is to come forward, it would need to be as a full application with all of that detail upon which we could make some very definitive judgments. And there are just too many open issues at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. Councillor Price, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just in relation to if this site was developed, obviously every time you create a residential development, you create a need for public amenity space. You know, by what we're hearing tonight, technically we're taking away some public amenity space from a couple of decades ago. But the worrying thing for me would be that it puts at risk potential adjacent sites. And I'm talking about the archery site, which is a public amenity space of sorts. which is council owned. Is there anything as part of this application that we can put anything within it to promote the use of that area to be reserved for public amenity space only or recreational use? You know, I would worry. I know it's not necessarily part of this application and it's outside the application site, but if officers can get where I'm heading with this, is it something that we can ensure that that space is very much looked at in the future as a public amenity or recreational space, because it is under council ownership and potentially could be a site for development later on otherwise. Thank you.
Well, that's taking us back to questions. I'll ask Mr. Bolter to answer that one for us.
Thank you, Chair. Short answer, no. It's not included within the application. It's not under the ownership of the applicant. As you have highlighted, however, Councillor Price, it is under the ownership of the Isle of Wight Council. So I would assume that that would give a level of comfort and indeed a level of certainty over the control of the future use of the site and the potential future use of the site and what that might look like moving forward. And indeed, my note that I've just made to myself is the Isle of Wight Council could consider opening up the archery field as public open space and support it as a community asset moving forward. But that is a separate process that is not governed by the planning process. So that's a wider Isle of Wight Council issue.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. I've got Councillor Lilly next and then Councillor Spink.
Just in regard to that, the Isle of Wight Bowmen have a lease and they're just about to sign another lease. They had a lease of 25 years and they're just about to have another lease, probably for at least 15 to 25 years. So I think there isn't a clear that site, right, isn't, and it also has been taken out of the available site for development and in the proposed new plan within that, and it is important that field is extremely important because there is a lack of playing fields, right? Open as playing field in Ryde. In fact, I conferred with Councillor Stevens, and our knowledge was there are no open access playing fields in Ryde at all. They are either private. The Simeon Rec, which was one now, is used as a flood plain and cannot be used as a playing field in that way. So we do not have open access. So if a group wants to form a club or just go and play a little bit of football and everything, that is not available in Ryde at all. It is available in Binstead and on that side, but on the side of Ryde, that is not available. I'm sure Councillor Church will confirm that as well with her knowledge. And also in that part of Ryde, we have lots of high density housing where people live in flats and have no access to green space at all. We have on that the Ryde East side at least 3 of the top 5 deprived wards on the Isle of Wight within that. Just to go on my comment and view, I came here to be convinced otherwise, and I am very convinced about the need for housing. I wouldn't be a Ryde councillor if I wasn't really aware of that need and affordable rented housing, particularly because of during the pandemic that has literally dried up and we have a high number of families that are homeless. So I came here to be convinced, and I'm not convinced because there's not sufficient information, I believe, for this committee to make an objective decision other than refuse. I would be pushing forward a deferment for more information if really depending on what is actually proposed within that. And I will clarify some of that. There is clearly a question of two particular points of housing in the right area. There is clearly overdevelopment from the figures that have been accessed for the need of housing, particularly on new build. There are considerable amount of brownfield sites in Ryde that could be developed, and I don't believe that the applicant has really explored that. And I think it's extremely important because Harcourt Sands is a brownfield site. You know, it was a holiday camp and it's classified as a brownfield site. And there are other in the inner part of Ryde that are brownfield sites, and they could provide kind of to the housing need within that. And that's in the addition, it's very clear that we have overdevelopment in the area. My other point for consideration of refusal isn't exclusivity. Now, the reality is on that, in those 50 houses, there would be people who are elderly, there will be people with disabilities, right, who will not have access to cars all the time. And they would have to walk a considerable way to Marlborough Road and Long to get to amenities. And one of the things that this committee have not been provided for is visuals of the reality of the walk to Marlborough Road. If you go down Marlborough Road, and you will have Westacre Park fully accessing opposite Apley Manor Hotel. It's that you literally pass Derwent Drive, hit a brick wall on that side, which is opposite Apley Manor. So anybody on that side has to cross the road. If you move along past the Bowman and Apley Manor, you come into a private housing estate. The footpath there is not fit for purpose because it has trees coming out to them. So people have to walk in the middle of the road to actually access Apley Lane and Oakfield School. They would then have to cross the road to go to the amenities, which is a Premier shop, which is considerably down the road, and then the actual spa is considerable around the road. Now, if you are in a mobility scooter, you've got to go up the hill of Puckpool and round the bend, and then actually go into the road. And within that, if you've got a pushchair, you've got to push it up the hill, whatever. We need in our developments, and it's very clear in the plan, that there needs to be exclusivity and access for people. And this application does not give the detail. And I'm not satisfied that putting it under a variation order to actually get that in place with that. And if members actually walked around that area, they would realise that it is not accessible for the most vulnerable in our community. And with an ageing population and the likelihood people with disabilities and things would be, is totally unacceptable. So I would be opposing this application.
I'd like to thank you for that. There was a lot of information in there, Councillor Lilly, which was useful. I think we need to bear in mind particularly the role of the archery field and the accessibility. These are both very important points which you brought out. Have here is Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. I still have the my concern that I had at the outset, that there are so many issues outstanding, as it were, that I'm not certain that this is really appropriate for an outline planning application. I agree, therefore, with Councillor Lilly, and I agree with Councillor Jarman regarding the matters that they say are still outstanding. I don't propose to repeat those. I also consider that the principle of development in this area is far from clear. It is outside of the settlement boundary. It is therefore technically in what's described in the plan as the wider rural area. 128 houses at Harcourt Sands, and then 50 houses here will without doubt have an urbanizing effect on what is a rural, or at the very least a semi-rural area. And that is contrary to core strategy DN12. Added to that, the crime report in the papers that we do have talks of the necessity for lighting to a specific level, which I understand is a commercial level. That will have an urbanizing effect, and also my understanding is an effect on wildlife and biodiversity. And I note in the case officer's report that it said that it might be possible to help, as it were, biodiversity and wildlife to have a sympathetic, I think the expression is, lighting scheme. Well, I don't see how a sympathetic lighting scheme can be proffered when the crime report says there should be lighting to a specific level. Also, the crime report says that there should be a 1.8 meter boundary fencing, which is of great concern to me in a rural or at least semi-rural area, and completely out of character with the surrounding area. There is a degree of harm. It's a small degree of harm to heritage buildings, assessed in the report of the case officer, who considers, though, the advantages of the development outweigh, as it were, those harms. But it seems to me that the only advantages of this development are 50 houses towards the target, a degree of affordable housing, which probably won't be affordable to local needs, and some highway improvements. And in my view, the disadvantages, which I've tried to outline in summary, outweigh that within the meaning of paragraph 11D of the NPPF. So therefore, in my view, the tilted balance is not, well, it's applicable here, but the disadvantages of granting permission outweigh the advantages within the meaning of the tilted balance. And therefore, this committee does, in my view, have the right as a matter of law to refuse this application. So my instinct is to say that we don't consider it a satisfactory matter for an outline application and would refuse it on that basis. But in any event, I have concerns that prima facie, as it were, it's not a satisfactory site, and therefore doesn't satisfy the criteria of an outline application.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Spink, for your observations. Well, Councillor Price, you want to say something?
Yeah, just a couple of points on a couple of things that have been said. I think the so-called urbanising of the area by the Harcourt Sounds development doesn't make any sense, because it was a thriving holiday camp at one point that many of us here would have used. It's only in its dormant years become less urban, but I do get the other side of the road that's like previously undeveloped, obviously. But also, I'd be worried that we are, not so much from what Councillor Spink has just said, but from what Councillor Lilly said, that we would be looking to say that there is not enough information to make a decision on an outline application, because outline applications have a completely different rule book to full applications. That's the whole point of an outline application. So it would be futile of us trying to turn it down on lack of information, because reserved matters is the rest of the information when it goes to a full application. So I think we must steer away from looking at it from that perspective when it comes to any motion that we're going to consider shortly. But obviously bolted onto that is our clarification that it would definitely, because not all outline applications come back automatically to committee, but to ensure that any motion does condition that the full does come back to the committee, whether that's in a year, 3 years, or 10 years, or whatever. Okay, if it's connected to this outline application, that is.
I think we've already established that. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. I think, as Councillor Price has outlined, a lot of us are concerned with the ambiguity in this case. There is a lot of information which we'd perhaps like to have. But I do think, frankly, we need to become somewhat more comfortable with the fact that this is a principle of planning. And as Councillor Price has said, it's essentially whether this land is suitable. Now, I think there are clearly marginal issues. As a Rye Town councillor, and as Councillor Lilly has said, I think there's a big problem with overdevelopment, but that doesn't, I think, bleed into the question as to whether this considered on its merits as a separate application, which as a committee we are bound to do, particularly in a situation where the tilted balance is engaged. And I think my point on that is we would potentially stand in real danger, as we have seen with the Meadow View development, which was recently overturned by the planning inspectorate. I think much to our dismay, because the reasons which were advanced in opposition to that application were cogent, but we still have to be, to a certain extent, realistic of the framework within which we're operating. Yes, I think there are issues about the provision of affordable housing, but we do also have here the opportunity to put an indicative note as to what this committee is so minded to do. And I think, given what Councillor Lilly has said, there is a real issue about rental. We have seen an 85% exit of private accommodation in Ryde, and I think that boils down to the reality of people who are living in one-bedroom bedsits. And ultimately, you could advance the argument that this is a type of development, a conurbation which will be predominantly for wealthier individuals, but that doesn't, I think, affect the classical economic argument of supply and demand. We have an absolute demand. It will have an impact, however negligible that impact may be. There are still families without roofs over their heads. This is an outline application, and I think I do share concerns with Councillor Critchinson about safety and the access. I think those are things that we could deal with, even if not necessarily today, then certainly at the substantive application. And I think I would bring everyone's consideration back to the issue of the tilted balance. We need to show that there's a significant and demonstrable reason why we would potentially oppose this. And I haven't heard anything here, much as I would have liked to have done from a demonstrable perspective. Where is the evidence that it outweighs that tilted balance? And I think we need to be mindful of that, because ultimately, if we are not, it will simply go off to the planning inspectorate, and I think we will have real difficulties. We may risk losing the ability for the island to determine its own planning applications. And that is something which none of us would want to see. It could cause a huge impact to the island. And for those reasons, I am very forthrightly of the view that we should allow this to go forwards.
Councillor Drew, I'd just like to thank you for a very good strategic analysis. It's very good, because we were getting lost in a lot of things which weren't relevant, and you've really brought us back to the specifics of what we need to discuss this evening. That was very, very helpful. Thank you very much. And I have another. Yes, Councillor Brodie.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that I didn't attend the formal site visit like Councillor Drew, though I did, perhaps to Councillor Churchman's astonishment, cycle from Newport to the site on Saturday morning and had a good look at it. As a 65-year-old man, I use a bike on a regular basis, and not everybody will use bikes. I have to say to you, I pretty much agree with everything that Councillor Drew has just said. It is becoming increasingly evident to me on this committee that it's like Groundhog Day every time we get an application for housing to be built on marginally marginal sites, greenfield sites adjacent, whether sites are adjacent to settlement envelope, etc., etc. It is just like Groundhog Day with, sadly to say, the same councillors consistently against applications that need to deliver housing for the island. Councillor Drew has referred to the tilted balance, the presumption in terms of sustainable development. The bottom line is that if we do, unfortunately we haven't done it yet, but if we are going to start refusing applications when there is so much housing need, we will lose our powers as a planning authority, and that will be absolutely dreadful day for the Isle of Wight. From my point of view, we're in a real mess. The island plan is 10 years old. Frankly, I ignore it because of the tilted balance. It's 10 years old that we had I'm afraid to say the last administration tarried too long regarding revising it. They lost time there. And we're already a year into this administration, and hopefully Councillor Fuller sat over there is going to progress it this September. I've been had to defer it last April for reasons I never really understood. We have a possibility here of some affordable housing. Affordable housing, that I make no bones about, is extremely important to me as a local member. 17 or 18 properties. If we were to agree this with conditional permission, we could revise the 35% on-site affordable housing to include 100% affordable rented, for instance, which I would always be my preferred option, though I know Councillor Quirk would probably prefer shared ownership. You know, I wouldn't have a major argument with him about that, but we could do that to then protect affordability and to get away from this constant red herring that affordable housing is only houses that you buy. I represent a ward which is not predominantly, but has the highest percentage of affordable rented housing on the Isle of Wight. They don't live in £600,000 houses. They live in places that cost £400, £450 a month in rent. That is eminently affordable compared to rents of 800, 900, 1,000 plus, etc. in the private sector. That's what affordability is. It's why I will always try to support affordable rented possibilities. This site is, in my view, an urban site. It was urban when I first started to come to the Isle of Wight many, many years ago. I know I'm not from the island, but I've lived here over 30 years and I've been coming here for over 40 years. It's an urban site as far as I'm concerned, and it is, frankly, it is surrounded by development in so many regards. And I think, as I say to people regularly who oppose building on greenfield, was your house not on a greenfield? Doesn't matter how old it was on a greenfield sometime historically, whether it was hundreds of years or decades ago. It was built on a greenfield. Unless we have Chinese population control in this country, that's not going to happen. Our population on the island will continue to increase and we will need to provide homes. Finally, Chair, we also know that affordability is beyond the vast majority of young families on the Isle of Wight. Median earnings on the island are about 22,000, 23,000 a year. That might be a bit more than that now, I may be out of date, but are very low. People cannot afford mortgages. We need affordable housing. I would prefer to see a planning policy that will allow us to deliver far higher numbers of council house, affordable housing. I'd like the council to start building some houses as they have provided for in the budget, to start providing that. But until we get into that situation, hopefully sometime in the near future, we are going to have to deal with the 35% of any developments. We all know most of these developments won't happen, but we have to start racking them up for the moment. So I will support this application. It's an outline application, as Councillor Price quite rightly says. You deal with it very differently from a detailed application. That we know what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the highways issues. I see no problem as a cyclist there. I did not feel any, there was plenty of traffic around. I felt no danger. We're dealing with the percentage of housing and a couple of other things listed in paragraph 8.1. I hope that we will support it. We have to start being realistic and stop having Groundhog Day all the time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brody. I think we've had a very good debate. I can't see any other hands up at the moment, but I would like to commend everybody for sort of getting all these different opinions out. And it's been very, you know, I think we've covered the subject very well. I'm very pleased with the level of debate. I feel we're ready now for moving to a resolution, but maybe we could bear in mind the three things I've noticed coming out particularly is if we do move forward, say with a motion, the Brody is suggesting to accept the application. I think the three things I'd note are the idea about the affordable rent, whether we can bring in some sort of level of, you know, stipulation on affordable rent. I think we all agree on that one. I think that bringing out the issue of the playing field and the preservation of that space for the whole local community is particularly important. And the point about the access that was brought out about, you know, how important it is to have a sustainable transport access to the town itself. Does anybody else want to have a word or any other responses from anyone here on the top table? Okay,
I move that we accept the application.
Councillor Brody.
Chair, whilst I support Councillor Quirk's proposal, I would amend paragraph 8.1 to 35% on-site affordable housing, 80% of which should be rented, 20% of which should be shared ownership. Yeah, I'll second Councillor Quirk if he accepts that. Thank you.
By the way, we don't have to come up with the exact wording on the things that we've discussed, as I've discussed with the officers, is as long as we know what your objectives are, the officers can work out the exact wording of the motion. Thank you. So, Bridgerton.
Could I have clarification on adding in the road crossing and the road safety aspects? Can we do that now? I'd like to add that on the conditions now, that a zebra crossing is included in that to make, because there is no pavement on that side. That possible. Could I add that to that motion? Thank you.
Ms. Guard.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Critchley, if I just clarify that point, I think that from the debate that occurred, what you're suggesting is that there's a replacement of the uncontrolled crossings with a controlled crossing. So to replace the uncontrolled crossing with a controlled crossing. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. I'd like to see where that would be again, because I'm not entirely sure, because I don't want people walking in the road, and I'm very worried about road safety.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass to my colleagues.
Apologies, councillors, never worked with children, animals or IT equipment. The laptop has run out of juice and only a limited number of laptops are synced up to show the presentation through the new dongle. So apologies, bear with us. We're just bringing the presentation up on Sarah's laptop. So hopefully it'll be with us shortly.
Over here.
Okay, Councillor Critchley, so the proposed entrance is here to the south of Putpool Close. So the uncontrolled crossing points are tactile crossing here and here. There would be adequate visibility provided for those tactile crossing points. That's been confirmed by Island Roads in their comments on the application. So these would be the crossing points here, and then to the 1.8 metre wide footway, which would be widened, and then that would lead through to remodeled Putpool Close. And then there's these tactile crossing points here across the narrowed carriageway of Putpool Close, which would then lead on to the existing highway network up to Staunton Cross and beyond.
But I want there to be something more, like a zebra crossing in the middle, something that's going to slow traffic down. As one of the main issues, I get it anywhere where there is new developments, it is the speed of traffic and the extra people using.
Through the chairman, if possible. Thank you, Councillor Richardson. Can I just confirm that absolutely fine? Are you saying that you want a zebra crossing in the position of one of those uncontrolled crossings, or in a location to be agreed with Island Roads that's considered safe for a zebra crossing? Sorry. Do we want, sorry, just for clarification, do we want one crossing to across Putpool Hill and one to go across Putpool Close, or just one across Putpool Hill in the place of a uncontrolled crossing?
I think Putpool Hill is my main consideration with the traffic there, and I'd like it to be in the most suitable place,
Location.
please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's kind of clear now. Are councillors Quirk and Brodie happy with that? So I'm going to leave that again. I'm going to leave that to the officers to do the final exact wording, but we know what we all mean, I think, don't we? The other point I was thinking about was with some sort of guarantee can be placed on the archery field. Yes. I'm hearing no from left and right.
No, unfortunately, as advised, that's under separate ownership and outside the proposal in front of us.
If there's no one else wishing to say anything, shall we go to the vote? Can I see how are we doing the vote, Marie? Are we doing a named vote, or are we just doing by hands? Hands, fine. Can I see those in favour of the proposal, please?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Is the vote has been carried? Or any abstentions? I think
No.
I query the voting because there are 11 members present. Oh,
Councillor
yeah,
Churchman,
no,
yeah,
that
you had,
had to-
yes,
That's it.
thank you.
Were there actual abstentions? No.
It's a technical
Sorry, for
position.
clarification, I didn't vote. This was an undertaking I made when I was made chair that I would not vote. I would be completely neutral, so I can concentrate on the job of coming up with the right decision and not taking sides. That's my view. Can I come back to the point now of the, are we 15 minutes away? Shall we begin with the second application? And then maybe we'll see how we get on. We need Vanguard back again, don't we? Shall we do an extension now? Waiting for
I
that.
think so.
Can I get an agreement on whether we have an extra 30 minutes, please, for a discussion of the other application? Councillor Jarman.
I'm afraid I do have to leave sharp at 7 o'clock for a 7:30 meeting in Freshwater, Chair.
I understand. Understand.
And I already communicated that I have to know about.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Councillor Olive.
Happy to second that.
Okay. Show of hands. Yes, thank you very much. We're going to the presentation by Ms Wilkinson on the 14 High Street, Sandown, Isle of Wight. That's 22/00293/FUL. Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. As outlined in the description, the application site is the former bank, of which sits at 14 High Street, Sandown. Site's on the southern side of the road. We were there, councillors, on Friday, so you're aware of the location, very close to the junction with St John's Hill on the opposite side of the road. Area of the site's outlined in red. To the south of the site, southwest of the site, is Guadalupe Road, which we also walked down. Just a Google Earth image of the site with an approximate circle along round it to show that area in aerial form. A few photographs. As I said, we were there on Friday, but just to jog memories, the site is the central building in that first image, with the white bay and the black front of the black door, effectively as a white render, looking up the hill, and then an image from the rear of the site, which we also viewed on Friday. The application seeks consent to change the use of the building from a bank to a residential property. It seeks to change the entire building. Councillors will notice the plans on the screen show the existing floor plans, which show, in essence, storage area at the ground floor with toilets, moving up to the open bank area and office on the ground floor. If councillors remember, it's split level compared to the High Street and Guadalupe Road. We then have first floor and second floor accommodation showing offices and staff facilities. The proposed development would see the whole building used for residential accommodation over the effectively 4 floors, with the ground floor being used mainly for storage, utility and toilets. Officers are recommending refusal to the application, and there are 4 reasons listed in the report. The first 2 primarily related to the loss of the retail function or the commercial function of that frontage element of the site. So effectively this area, which is that main front space that looks out onto the High Street, is shown to be a family room, with then the kitchen, garden room, breakfast room, with then bedrooms, lounge and roof terraces above, and then 3 further bedrooms on the second floor. Another reason for refusal, sorry, there are 5, relates to the impact from the use of the 2 roof terraces for residential purposes because of their extensive size in relation to the neighbouring properties and the presence of a window, which we observed on site. And then the final 2 reasons relate to the fact the application is not currently supported by a signed unilateral undertaking to cover the issues of affordable housing and SPA mitigation, which are 2 of our required contributions for any residential development within this area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. At this point, I'd like to ask Councillor Andre to read the I don't know if you're going to read the statement from Ian Ward, or you'll make the case yourself. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, I've been asked to speak on behalf of Councillor Ward, but this is my statement that I've prepared in conjunction with Councillor Ward, and we are both of the same mind. I don't think that anyone would dispute that Sandown is a town in need of regeneration and that its high street is a key component of this. We know that retail high streets have been in decline nationally over recent years, and there were 11 empty shops in Sandown High Street the last time I counted. The property in question, the former Lloyds Bank, closed on the 24th of April 2017 and has laid empty since then, deteriorating and adding to the decline of the high street. At the end of March 2021, the then Communities Secretary, Robert Jenrick, announced that the government had laid down new planning rules, allowing the conversion of a vast array of high street premises into housing without planning permission to come into effect from April the 21st, 2021. He continued, unused, and I quote, unused commercial buildings will be granted a new permitted development to be converted into homes via a fast-track prior approval. Allowing unused commercial buildings to be changed into homes will encourage more people to live near local high streets and come to the area for work and leisure, helping cement our high streets and town centres in their rightful place at the heart of communities. So, on to the reasons for refusal. And just to clarify, I think we do have 5 reasons for refusal. The first reason quotes policy DM9 from the Island Plan Core Strategy, which states, to ensure proposals within the town centre boundary for changes of use of ground floor premises to other non-retail uses will not be permitted unless it can be demonstrated that either individually or cumulatively, the development would have no significant adverse impacts on the retail function, design, character, vitality and viability of the town centre. I would argue that as the property has been empty for over 5 years, there can be no significant adverse effect on the retail function. And I would go further to add that the new planning law introduced in April of last year supersedes this. Reason for refusal number 2 quotes policies DM2, Design for Quality for New Development, and DM11, Historic and Built Environment. It states that the residential use would appear incongruous, but the owner has only enhanced the existing street scene and made no permanent or substantial changes to the exterior. And I can say that the enhancements have been very much appreciated by local residents who have made many complimentary remarks regarding the changing seasonal window displays. Also, this is not a new development, and it's my understanding that it's only a change of use of part of the building, as the upper floors of the property have been used as residential accommodation. In addition, policy DM11 states, under section D, the harm to or loss of the heritage asset is outweighed by the benefits of bringing the site back into use. It's my opinion that this heritage asset is being retained and brought back into use. Item 3 for refusal again quotes policy DM2 in relation to the proposed roof terraces. Committee members will no doubt have noted from the site visit and also from the plan on page 61 of the papers that the shape of the plot widens to the south, and this therefore, in my opinion, mitigates any impact on neighbouring amenities, the property due south being the rear of Premier Inn. Reason number 4, item 6.16 in the papers confirms that Southern Water have confirmed that the foul sewage for the existing property is sent to and managed by the water treatment plant in Sandown, and therefore into the channel, not the Solent, As such, it is considered that the proposal would not result in harm to the Solent Marine sites through an increase in nitrate enrichment. And that was a quote from their comment. I would also argue that the number of occupants as a family home would be less than when the property was operated as a bank and occupied by many staff members. Item 5, a contribution towards affordable housing provision is requested under policy DM4. I believe this request to be fundamentally flawed under several caveats. Policy DM4 under 2.3 states that there are specific circumstances where contributions for affordable housing and tariff-style obligations, i.e. Section 106 contributions, should not be sought. It goes on to state that contributions should not be sought from developments of 10 units or less. Item 2.17 goes on to say that during 2016,
You have much more to do.
It's my understanding that I wasn't time limited, but I haven't got much more, and I would
If you could
ask
bring
for-
it to a close, it's very, very good. I'm enjoying it.
Thank you. I repeat, item 2.17 goes on to say that during 2016, there were discussions between the local planning authority and a working party established by the Chamber of Commerce Agents Forum to identify the problems associated with the existing supplementary planning document. Following review of the established mechanisms, a series of principles was established, one of which being that it must not add burden to development delivery or finance limitations. I would also argue that this is a sympathetic restoration for self-occupation by a family, not a development for commercial gain. Under item 3.15, section 2, financial contributions would not apply where the development would not result in a net increase of new dwellings. As the existing property, to my understanding, already has a residential element, with the former commercial element of the property being brought into residential use totally as one unit, as we heard earlier, there is no net increase in the number of properties.
Councillor Andre, can I ask you to bring it to a close?
I'm on my final summation now. The committee will also have noted that Ilam Roads has recommended approval. And in conclusion, for the reasons given, I ask that the committee recommend approval for the change of use from commercial, formal bank, to a dwelling under the prior approval process without the requirement for a financial contribution or full planning application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. That was an extremely well researched and presented argument. Thank you very much. I don't know who would like to respond to that.
Thank you, Chairman. Lovely. I just want to come back on some factual points, if I may. In terms of the comments, and I'm going to work through, so bear with me, please. I've tried to note down all the ones I need to come back on, so bear with me. One of the comments related to the fact that it would only relate to a partial change of use of the building, that there's already a residential use within the building. I have shown councillors as part of the presentation the submitted existing plans. The submitted existing plans showed offices and a staff room on the first and second floor. It didn't say that that was a flat or any form of residential accommodation. It stipulated that it was all associated with the commercial activity of the building. Therefore, from an officer's perspective, it has not been used for residential purposes. Secondly, supporting that position is that the application was originally submitted as a prior notification, as a prior approval that was refused. You can only submit a prior notification if you have not commenced development. So if a development had commenced prior to the legislation coming in, they couldn't have a prior notification anyway, prior to the application being submitted. So if at the time the prior notification was submitted, the date of which is stipulated in the history section of the report, so bear with me, that prior notification was refused as set out on page 52 in December 2021. So if they had been residential prior to that time, they would not have been able to submit a prior notification for residential development of that building. So from an officer's perspective, it is a net gain in a residential unit. And we don't believe that's incorrect based on the information submitted and the history of the site. And in relation to reason 4 and the foul sewerage, 2 issues are getting confused there. This is not about nitrates. Officers absolutely support the fact that this would not have an impact on nitrate enrichment because it goes to Sandown. That is why we have not required a nitrate neutrality statement, that they haven't had to provide those calculations. We are talking about the document we have, which we refer to as the Bird Aware strategy, which relates to the impact on the SPA from recreational disturbance. It is a separate point entirely, and that is based on the impact of overwintering birds within the SPA. And that the only mitigation for that is, well, there are 2 forms of mitigation, either a contribution towards the solar mitigation strategy, the Bird Aware strategy effectively, and the alternative is that the applicant provide their own mitigation for the recreational disturbance in relation to the resultant additional residential unit. The fact that, so that's that element, so they're 2 separate points. In relation to reason 5 and the issue of the affordable housing contribution, this is linked to the SPD as much as it is to the policy DM4, but what I would highlight is DM4 states that to provide 35% of development as on-site affordable housing based on developments of 15 plus units in key regeneration areas and 10 plus units elsewhere. 2, provide a financial contribution towards affordable housing for developments of 1 to 14 in key regeneration areas and 1 to 9 units in smaller regenerations and rural areas. The end of that policy then stipulates the contributions towards affordable housing will be set out in a planning obligations SPD. We have an affordable housing SPD, which stands for supplementary planning document, which stipulates actually what's set out in the report. So the threshold percentage calculator we use to establish that affordable housing contribution. I think they were the only points of clarity I wanted to provide, other than we cannot approve a prior notification for this because that is not the application in front of us. A prior notification was submitted, it was refused. The application in front of us is a planning application and we have to consider it in conjunction with policies on that basis. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson. Again, that's very, very detailed, very helpful, very useful. I presume from here we go straight into questions, yeah? So, Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Could the plan officer just clarify the previous upper floor use for accommodation? Was that I attend, as you know, I attended the site visit, but I got there just as you were all leaving. But I was there, as you saw. So I didn't experience the debate outside the building, obviously. But the upper floors were previously residential. The 2 upper floors, not the first floor or the ground floor. Sorry.
Floor, which is the which is the area you get to from the high street effectively. So this would have been the main bank area in essence. Oh, apologies, I've managed to move it along. Then the upper floor, so the first floor and the second floor are shown as offices, staff, which I presume is a staff room, and then 2 further offices. So the existing plans show absolutely no residential use of that property whatsoever. In order to have submitted the prior notification at the end of last year, the building could not have been used for residential purposes, or they would not have been able to submit a prior notification. So from an officer perspective, the submission of a prior notification that was refused in December is effectively proof that it was not used in any way for residential accommodation.
Price.
Okay, I'm gonna sort of stray slightly into an observation or a comment at the same time as sort of trying to ask a question, which probably isn't answerable. But I, you know, I always listen to local members at committee and their views because I think they're relevant. It's unusual to see something that we're looking to go against refusal on. It's kind of like the opposite way to what we often sort of consider here. But the loss of retail space in a unit that's been empty for a long time, from a councillor's perspective, it is irrelevant. But once you lose it, you've lost it for good. Okay. Now, if that unit was reducing the retail space and converting the upper floors to accommodation, that would add to our housing availability, and it would bring down the cost of the retail unit. So why we're even considering going against the officer's recommendation is absolutely bonkers. Am I right? So we should be going with the officer's recommendation to turn this down and ask for the owners to come back with an application to convert the upper floors to accommodation and preserve the retail space on the ground floor, which will make it cheaper and make it more viable for a business to open and operate in there. I'm sure that's what I think I'm getting this right, aren't I?
Thank you, Councillor Price. That's very clear what your interpretation is. Can anyone else like to comment on that? Councillor Churchman.
Yes, Sandown High Street is hardly the retail event of the island. There are quite a few empty shops, as we well know. The area itself, I'm sorry, Debbie, is a bit run down, partly because there are empty retail units. Ladies' Realm, for example, has now moved out. And the building in question is probably one of the nicest looking buildings in the whole high street. And I would suspect, looking at it, in 1860, 80, whenever it was built, it was probably a house. I just feel we're splitting hairs. On the one hand, we're prepared to build on greenfield site. And then on another, and we talk about we desperately need housing. And now we're splitting hairs and saying, no, you can't turn it into a house because. I mean, that's my simple take on the situation, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. My next person I've got is Councillor Quirk. Thank you.
I think the officers got this one right. This is a good, a very attractive retail frontage. There's plenty of room. I mean, this house has got so many lounges and family rooms that it's sort of unbelievable. You don't need the amount of family accommodation. You won't be able to use it. You can still keep the shop front, and if it's just a very small shop front, just a very small shop, storeroom and a toilet, it will be at that level that it won't actually attract business rates. So it's a good start-up little unit that could give them an income, help pay the mortgage. I think the officers got it right. I think the officers got it right about the overlooking of the window up on the roof terrace as well. So I agree with Councillor Price that we should support the officer recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Price, you want to come back?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely nailed it. In Newport, there's Newport councillors here. We would love some of those empty shops to convert the upper floors to accommodation, invest in the accommodation, reduce the rent on the ground floor, have a business back in there, possibly not paying any business rates or much, much lower business rates rather than paying business rates on 3 floors that you don't use. But once you lose it, it's gone for good. And if you let one go, all of the others will be going the same way. I think it's a short-term solution to something that we need a long-term solution to. So I absolutely support the officer's recommendation. I don't like going against what the local members feel, but when you look at other towns around the island, we need upper floor accommodation and we need ground floor retail space. What we don't need is I'll give you an example in Newport, the Topshop building. That building is a problematic building for a business to go back into now, unless it needs lots of stock room. Businesses don't have stock rooms anymore. It's all ordered in and sold and then replenished. The upper floors, make it too expensive to occupy. So I absolutely feel that we should go with the officer's recommendation and hope that the applicant will come back with something that we really can support. Thank you.
Councillor Churchman.
Am I not correct in, and I'm not sure about this. I thought that one or two places in Newport High Street had been converted into housing.
Some of them have, yeah. Some have, yeah.
So why should it happen in one town and not another?
Sorry.
I'm surprised, yes.
Sorry, I've got to come back and
Sorry,
say,
a little bit,
but
but
not on ground floor. The ones that have been converted on ground floors, I'm sorry, have made a bit of a mess of it. And I think this is, and that's not in our upper high street, it's the upper floors we're talking about and preserving the ground floor for retail use.
Okay, have we got any other comments or questions or, yes, Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a question, if I may please, about the affordable housing contribution. If I've understood it correctly, under policy DM4, they should make a contribution to affordable housing, and they've not submitted any financial assessment to show otherwise. Presumably, that's grounds, as it were, for refusing this application in itself, or not?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. As a rule, from a kind of officer perspective, every reason for refusal should stand alone in its own right, regardless of the others. So yes, absolutely.
Have any other comments or questions? Yes. Councillor Aldred.
Much. Can I just ask, has the applicant submitted any information in relation to the viability of transforming the building into a residential unit upstairs and a shop downstairs, in terms of, is there adequate access to actually allow them to do that? Or are we looking at either all commercial or all residential, because the frontage and the rear don't allow enough access?
Very good point.
Through the Chairman, thank you. If I share this once again, from the current slide, hopefully, this shows the proposed floor plans, which I'll talk through again because I don't think you can see the writing on them effectively. But I'd also kind of point out that the neighbouring properties have residential accommodation on first floor and commercial on ground floors, and they appear to be accessed entirely separately. When we were at the back in Guadalupe Road, you can see that there are gates at the rear to access. So there would effectively be access from Guadalupe Road into what is, can see this door here on the ground floor, into what they're calling the garden room. So you could come in at that point. Also, that this layout shows that this is the shop front effectively, and then you have this access in here. So you would effectively be able to access the shop that way, which is where it's currently accessed at this point. And then you would access the residential property to the rear potentially, like other residential properties along there. What you'll also see as part of this existing floor plan is that there is actually a staircase here. So I think there's also access from this position potentially, but that's speculative. But certainly you've got doors at the rear that you could access the property by, and a separate door at the front that you could access the commercial property, which I believe is how the neighbouring properties operate.
Thank you for that. I'm aware of time passing. Can we please move to a motion on this, please? Councillor Churchman.
Yes, I move that we support the application. I'm afraid against the officer's advice. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion? There's no seconder, so I don't think that motion falls. Thank you, Councillor Quirk.
Move that we accept the officer recommendation.
As a recommendation for refusal. Councillor Quirk, and is that a seconding? So So councillor Quirk as motion, seconded by councillor Oliver, that we agree with the officer's recommendation for refusal of the application. Can I see all those in favour of the motion, please? And those against, please. And any abstentions? Well, it seems that that's been rejected, except the motion has been carried. I'll put it that way. Thank you all very much. I think, oh no, we still have members' questions. So any members' questions, or are we all exhausted? I think that's no then. So thank you all very much for participating this evening. It's been a very, I think it's been a very useful meeting. Thank you.